You could not think of any place else to be. Before we get started, a couple of things. Thank you first to my vice chair, Ms. Anna Shepard, for sitting in for me while I've been traveling for the last couple of weeks. Great conferences, and I will have a full report at our business meeting in August. And so tonight's work session, I don't have my agenda in front of me, but basically we're talking strategic plan and teacher dismissals. And so, one other thing that I want to say before we go into our work session, let me just say there has been some question about agenda planning, and I wanted to clear that up so that all the board members are aware. The agendas are set by the executives committee, and that consists of Dr. Register and myself. However, board members drive those agendas. So, as board members, whenever you need have a issue that you need to get on the agenda, please let me know what that is. We discuss it in executive session. Dr. Register make sure that his staff is available to answer any questions based on the agenda that is set. So, any questions about that? Super. And we're going to start really quickly with announcements, and Dr. Brandon will start at your end of the table today.
Thank you.
Ms. Spearing?
Yes, I attended the back-to-school bash that Goodlettsville Middle put on Saturday, and although it was hot, it was well attended. And Maplewood will have their back-to-school bash on Tuesday, August the 3rd, which is a Saturday from 12 to 3. They'll be giving away backpacks and free groceries for the first 250 families. That will be sponsored by Youth for Christ, Maplewood Family Resource Center, and United Neighborhood Health Services. And then Hunters Lane will have their a parent meeting in their auditorium on Tuesday, July the 30th at 6 o'clock for new parents of transfer students and for freshmen. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Ms. Kim. Ms. Shepard.
I have a couple. Thank you. I announced this previously, but the McGavitt Cluster Coalition is sponsoring the McGavitt Town Hall meeting that will be held next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Registration begins at 5 o'clock. It'll be from 5 to 6 o'clock. We want to introduce everybody to all the great things that are going on at McGavitt High School. Principal Wall will be there, as will several local leaders. So we invite everyone to come out and visit with us that night. Also, Thursday, August 1st, the first day of school, we will be at McGavitt High School at 6:15 in the morning to welcome all the students back to school. And that night, also, the Simon Youth Foundation is sponsoring the Sounds game, and our very own Dr. Register is throwing out the first pitch. Proceeds of the ticket sales will go to our non-traditional academy, so we encourage everyone to come out and witness Dr. Register's great talent in pitching and donate toward the non-traditional academies.
Thank you. Mr. Pinkston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to take a minute to congratulate a few friends, including my former boss, Governor Phil Bredesen, his education advisor, Margaret Horn, and our friend Ellen Register, who, as head of the Tennessee Business Roundtable in 2007, launched what was known at the time as the Tennessee Diploma Project. This work started as a very simple conversation about skills needed in the workforce so that our high school graduates could find good jobs for themselves and their families. It evolved into Tennessee's standards reform movement, a collaborative effort of teachers and parents that laid the groundwork for Common Core and other reforms. I'm bringing this up now because earlier this month, Harvard University's journal, Education Next, recognized this work as instrumental in what it called the Tennessee Miracle, a series of developments that, according to Harvard, has led to Tennessee being ranked number 2 in the nation in the strength of K-12 academic standards. That's probably the first time we've ever been ranked in the top 10 of anything in education. And I think the way to think about this is Tennessee raised the bar and set high expectations in the classroom. And the one thing we know about our kids is they will rise to the occasion and meet the expectations that we set for them, and they are. So congratulations to everyone who was part of that work 6 years ago, including Dr. Register, who at that time was in Hamilton County, which was a major part of the work. So history is viewing that fondly, and I'm proud of that. Second, on July 8th at Casa Atzafran in the heart of School Board District 7, I had the privilege of participating in the South Nashville leg of Nashville Next, a project by the Metro Planning Commission to create a vision for our community for the next generation. So far, thousands of Nashvillians have participated in Nashville Next, and no doubt many more will join before the final plans are adopted in fall 2014. For anyone who has not participated, I would urge you to get involved, make your voice heard. You can engage online at nashvillenext.net or on Facebook at Nashville Next. It is a highly structured, comprehensive initiative. Schools are a central part of our community planning, and I'm proud that the Planning Commission and the mayor and others are helping lead that effort. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hayes. Ms. Froh? Perfect. And as I said, I did attend a couple of conferences that I will report on at our next board meeting. They were fantastic. They were absolutely fantastic. And so wait for the fun. Last thing is, don't forget, school starts August 1st, and for those of you not paying attention, we will be watching those speeders at the school bus stops. So, having said that, we're going to jump right into the super fun here. Dr. Register, you are on.
Thank you very much. I would like to make one announcement, if I may. I usually don't do this, but we need to advertise our student attendance enrollment centers. If all of you know that we changed our approach to enrolling students in the summer this year, and this week we are, our 12 zone high schools are enrolling K-12 students. So it's centralized, and we started yesterday. We had 700 students enroll yesterday, and I understand big crowds today. So hopefully we're serving our public better and getting a lot of those students who have moved into the area enrolling before school starts. So I'm really pleased to announce that. We thank all of you for being here. It's good to see you, and we've got couple of heavy topics tonight, a lot to talk about, so we'll launch right into it.
Let me just say one thing. Don't forget our toy. All mics will be muted. If you want to make a comment, please get my attention and I'll turn your mic on. Just around this table. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, good. The first topic that we're going to deal with is strategic plan, and I hope all of you had an opportunity to look at the 2 attachments that were sent to you last week on the strategic plan. In all, it's about a 45-page document plus a PowerPoint presentation, and this is intended to give you a good introduction and some next steps with the strategic plan. I'd like to go back, if I may, just a minute and very quickly do a little bit of brief history on where we are with strategic planning in our district now. I came to the district in January of 2009, and one of the activities that we did at that time was to spend about 4.5 months reviewing all of the mini reports, and there was a stack this high of reports that had been done on the district, state reports and various studies had been done. We also visited about 100 schools that spring and visited all 12 clusters. We had cluster parent meetings, cluster faculty meetings, and really tried to gather a lot of data. The outcome of that process that winter was to initiate MNPS Achieves in May of 2009, which was our transformational change approach to transforming the district into a high-performing district. And that comprehensive reform strategy has been in place, and we've moved from primarily a planning component at the outset to implementation now. And in fact, MNPS Achieves, for the most part, has become regular operations. That's what we do. That's how. That's from the process we're implementing that plan now. Then right after MNPS Achieves was started, we had the great good fortune of being the first state selected to receive Race to the Top funds. And in our district, we received about $30 million. We're in the last year of the use of that fund now. That provided resources really to implement a lot of those strategies that were developed as coming out of MNPS Achieves. We were a finalist in the second Race to the Top grant. We didn't win that, but that was a process that lasted several months just a year ago as we got into writing that grant, and it really took a look at next steps. So where do we go from MNPS Achieves? Where do we go from our first Race to the Top grant? What are the next things that we need to do? And it formed a basis of us looking at a strategic plan for the district from 2013 to 2018. I want to recognize Lisa Wiltshire and Tamara Fentress. Lisa and Tamara are over there. They are the facilitators and architects of this plan. They've worked with the chiefs who have done the substantive work and involved many people in the district, many focus groups, many parent groups over a period of time to develop the strategic plan to the place where it is now, and I think they'll talk a little bit more about that. The PowerPoint that you have and that is on the screen is merely an introduction, or the tip of the iceberg, if you will. We'll talk to you. We'll show you how to navigate that if you need that. I really need to know if you were able to navigate it and drill down into the strategic plan as you had time since last Friday. But let me summarize this for our viewers to start with, and say, when you really drill down into this, when you look deeply at what's included in this strategic plan, we're talking about a K-12 literacy plan, an extensive human capital development area, including strategic compensation. We're talking about implementation of the Common Core, a real focus on middle schools. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Personalized learning for middle school students, which is very important, social emotional development of middle school students, a diversity plan, a technology plan, and so on. So there is quite a bit here, and one of the challenges that we face in a fairly short period of time is giving you an opportunity to look at what's been developed and what's being proposed. But that's what we're going to try to do at this point in time. So if you'll look at the, and Lisa, if you would switch to the next slide now. This is our vision statement, and I think that's very important, and it is the vision statement that this Board of Education developed some time ago now. We still use the same words. We still have the same meaning for that. But the mission statement's been developed as a part of the strategic planning process, and I'm not going to read that, but I want to talk about the point of focus. And that point of focus in that mission that we see as our mission is transforming all schools into high-performing schools. That's where we can have an impact in our district, and developing and having our students demonstrate excellence through the academic, social, and emotional success of every student. I want to turn it over to, okay, next slide, please. This is a starting point for our strategic plan. You've seen this. There are three essential questions here. Are our students growing academically, socially, and emotionally every year? Are our students achieving at high academic standards? And are all of our students empowered by having voice, choice, and ownership of their learning experiences? This is really how we define success. And answering yes to these essential guiding questions is the way we check on how we're doing. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and Paul to walk through the goals and the measures at this time.
Well, good evening. Sorry about that. Before we get into more of the content of the strategic plan, I wanted to just inform you a little bit more about the process that we've gone through to create the strategic plan. This strategic planning process has really been an inductive one, as Dr. Register mentioned to you, and it is based on an extensive analysis of the last 3 to 4 years of reform efforts. That includes evaluations of reform efforts that have have been put into place. We've had some third-party evaluations. We've had some specific program evaluations. We have learned quite a bit in the last 3 years as we have implemented many reforms that came out of the work of the TLGs and MNPS Achieves, as well as those reform efforts that were funded by Race to the Top and aligned to those pillars that were part of the Race to the Top legislation. There's been quite a bit that has happened, as you all well know, and that has really provided a lot of material for us to look at and say, okay, now that we are this far in, what have we learned? What do we know? What has worked? And so a big part of this planning process was the kind of research, both research from what's happening in the field nationally in terms of best practices, as well as what we've seen in our own district. We have some high-performing schools that have really turned the dial and have made some significant progress, and that includes high-performing charters as well as traditional schools. And so we've really gone through an extensive process of looking at that and looking at what works and using that as the kind of basis and information and knowledge that this plan is really predicated on. As well, we went through a process in the fall that Dr. Register mentioned when we were creating the district grant, which wasn't just a typical grant writing process, that really required the leadership at the district to go through an extensive period of time visioning what is it that we want to see in our schools in the future. So that was really the first step in this process. That was the visioning part. This process has been several months in the making. After that came the central office restructuring in February, and that was another step in this multi-step process to have a more effective and efficient central office and organization in order to make this happen. So this plan, as we are presenting it to you, again, is the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to come. There's a lot more behind this. And this is really all part of a multi-step effort and process that will continue for the next 5 years to really create that dynamic, high-functioning system that has the flexibility to innovate and transform. The work that was done in the fall involved extensive stakeholder input, which is another point that I really wanted to emphasize for you. We had teacher focus groups, principal focus groups, student focus groups, parent focus groups, and we involved and got a tremendous amount of input and feedback from some of our partners, community partners and business partners, as well as the chamber, the report card. So all of that to say that this is several months in the making, has involved a tremendous amount of work by people you see here and a lot of people who aren't here, synthesis, evaluation, research. So there's a lot that this is based on, and what we're showing you tonight is as a brief PowerPoint and a frame of reference, but I just wanted you to be aware of the work that has gone into this and the process that's been involved. And if you'll recall, in May, we presented you with a first draft, which outlined some of our goals, 5-year goals, ambitious goals. And so tonight, what we're going to do is just give you an overview of the goals, but we're really going to focus in on the strategies. The goals, really set what we're aiming for, and tonight's going to be about the what and how we plan to get there. And so with that, I will turn it over to Paul, who's going to do the overview of the goal section for you all again.
Okay. Thank you. So we have gone through the goals previously, but let me just remind you that the method we used in establishing the goal was to take a rather aggressive approach in terms of raising achievement, empowering students in terms of our measures. The goal for us is to cut the number of students in half who are below the standard that we're seeking, whether it's to be proficient on these high-stakes exams or whether to feel connectedness to school, to cut those in half over a 5-year period rather than the 8-year period that the state is using in terms of setting its accountability targets. So you see the first target we have here is to have 60% of our students advancing one achievement level over a 5-year period, and that's a cumulative process. And last year, 2012, we were at 9%. We are going to be using 2013 data to establish our baseline after those results are in soon, and we hope to be able to report out next month most of that baseline data. We've also set goals in terms of growth with value added, looking at 58% of our students on an annual basis meeting or exceeding their peers. Value added typically looks at growth in terms of average performance. We want to take it down to individual students meeting those goals, and that will be an annual update in terms of whether they're keeping up with students statewide that year. The last two measures that on this page are new, and these are going to take some time to develop. I think we're on the cutting edge in a lot of ways in terms of looking at social emotional engagement and so forth, social emotional learning, connectedness to school. And we're still working on the specific measures. We anticipate that we will be using some existing survey information that we have currently, social emotional learning survey of students that we have through American Institutes of Research, and some other measures that we can talk about more as you have questions. But the belonging to school, whether or not kids feel that connectedness, is a critical piece to their development. The core competencies as identified by CASEL are setting the framework for us. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. We're looking at different surveys that are available to us. And that includes the AIR survey that I mentioned, but also even the tripod survey that we just administered this spring has a care nurturing component. There are other surveys that we're utilizing in certain grades. We may not be using the entire instrument. We hope to take out those pieces that align best with the goals that we've established here. We've been working with Maury Nation at Peabody, who's a national expert in this area. He's reached out to colleagues at the University of Virginia, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and we're trying to get some of the best minds around this. What we're finding is that this really is not an area that most school districts have pursued, but we're excited about the possibility. But it's going to take some time. This, as I said, this year our goal is to get key measures in place and then report out at the end of the year on those components that we have and keep building as we go forward. Our next section is on Achieve, and you're familiar with the all students achieving high academic standards. We're talking about our annual assessments. This time, rather than looking at growth components, we're looking at what % of our students have met a high standard. Currently, we're at 42% in 2012 who scored proficient or advanced across all of the state assessments we do. Our aggressive goal is to get to 71% over the next 5 years. And as our new data comes in, if the bar has gone up, we will adjust and we would go higher than 71% over a 5-year period. For the ACT, if you recall, we're not only looking at ACT performance, but what % of students are projected to be at a 21 or higher, and that's also a 990 on the SAT scale would be the corresponding target for us. But what % of students are on track to hit that 21? And the goal in 2018 is to get to 40%. Currently, we're only at 16%, and that's an area that we have work to do. The ACT itself, for our high school seniors, 29% in 2012 scored a 21 or higher. We anticipate by 2015 that will be at least half of our students scoring there. Then we have goals in terms of taking college credit courses that By 2018, 3/4 of our students, 75%, would be enrolled in at least one course for college credit by the time they graduate, and that 100% of those students would take the corresponding exam, AP exam, and so forth, and that 75% of those students would pass the exam. And also, as we mentioned last time, by 2018, that 100% of our high school students would complete a capstone project experience by the time they graduate. And then our Empower goals, and these are quite new to us, and they're still, as I said, in development. But by 2018, that all of our students, 100%, would describe their school learning experiences positively. And what we're talking about is perceptual data from students, again, using Tripod and the safe supportive school survey instruments that are relevant. Tripod has scales that capture engagement, whether students are captivated, stimulated, whether they're being challenged, whether they're we're demanding and requiring high expectations, high standards in all of our classes. And then there's also a confer or consult piece, is a teacher bringing the student voice in. But we don't want to simply rely on the social emotional learning side or the empowerment side strictly on perceptual data. And we're looking and working with Maury Nation, and we'll be working with CASEL on some observational measures that might be relevant. Capturing snapshots as we go into schools of the engagement that's occurring between students and between students and teachers. Then there's also a goal on families who rate and students who rate their school's program fit quite well or higher, and that would increase from 2014-15. And obviously this is new to us. We have some measures that we're going to be looking at. I know that in Tony Major's office, they're looking at some parent surveys to look at engagement that's going on with some of their families at the high school level. But we're working with Maury Nation again on this. Maury is involved with, Dr. Nation is involved with the state on replacing what was the Tell Tennessee survey of educators with an assessment they're building, which would also have hopefully a parent component. And one of the advantages of working with Dr. Nation in this project is we may have an opportunity to include some items in that survey that would be specifically relevant to our goals and our interests. But the bottom line is, are we meeting family needs here? And that, again, that could be survey. It might even include some focus groups to go into more depth. By 2018, 100% of our K-12 students will demonstrate leadership skills as measured by school-level evaluation rubrics. And I think Dr. Steele could speak to this, and it's nice to be able to call you Dr. Steele, can speak to this. And but we want teachers to be evaluating students on an ongoing basis, to be able to evaluate their leadership skill, which will differ in terms of the way that's demonstrated from student to student. We should be assessing those things as we have conferences around our students. And then also by 2018, that 100% of our students will set learning goals and track their own learning progress, that they will take responsibility for that growth.
Okay, may I have the mic back, please? So if you look at the next slide, we talk about levers of change, and really what we're talking about here is so how do we leverage change in our district to accomplish the goals that we're setting? What we're using is basically the research and the work that we did in MNPS Achieves and what we've learned from those efforts at Reformed, and looking at current research to really look at what works for us. Personalized, and those levers of change, if you will, are encompassed in these four approaches: personalized learning, quality teaching, equity and excellence, and transformational leadership. I'm not going to take a lot of time to dig into those now. I think you're all aware of those concepts, but first, in personalized learning, it's just essentially focusing on each individual student, paying attention to each individual student, for adults to focus on building positive relationships with those students, and particularly a focus on middle grades, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go on. Quality teaching, working in our business as human capital, and working along the entire spectrum of developing people, not just recruiting talent, but building talent, building leadership, supporting and retaining the talent that we have in our school system, and getting the best. Equity of resources. Equity is very important as we look at how we use resources in the district, how we allocate those, how we address every school, and give them the resources needed for each of them to be successful. Transformational leadership, I'll say this about that the principal is seen as the core element of change in our district. Focusing on building principles is something that we've been working on for 3 years now, and we feel really good about the development that we've brought into that. But it's not just about principles, it's also growing leadership capacity in our district, and there are many examples of how we're doing that. One of the programs that we're really proud of is our Teacher Leadership Institute, where we take the very best of our third-year teachers and give them a leadership experience, and we're already seeing great results from that as we go forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay now and let him begin talking about the levers of change. Jay?
Well, thank you. Before we get into this slide, I want to share with you some work that Brenda and I have been working on. Brenda and I are very passionate about our students and the experience they have in the schools and the success that they have. So we have been working since February to create, with many of the people sitting in the audience from many of the different departments, to create a K-12 alignment of everything that we're doing. The sheet that you're getting, you're the first people to see this. This is an alignment of what our students look like as they exit each tier, the characteristics that they will possess, and these are all measurable. And so briefly I'll introduce this to you for Grow, Achieve, and Empower. And they are aligned across the page. The first one is the 5 characteristics of a 4th grade student. These are things we want a 4th grade student to possess, that they're ready for middle school. And there are rubrics that are measurements that will be in place that we can easily look at: a passage rate, retention rates, discipline rates, attendance rates, achievement rates, to make sure that these kids are on track to be a successful middle school student. If you go across to the middle school, you'll see ready for high school. Same metrics in place there, with the addition of taking high school courses in the middle school. And that moves you right on over to the high school graduate, that they're ready for post-secondary and career, that they have that 10-year plan in place, they know where they're going, they've applied to college, they've applied to whatever post-secondary options that they want for themselves. Going back to the left, we look at the ACT and the Explore, that the elementary 4th grade student is on track to score at least a 16 on Explore, that they actually score at least a 16 in the middle school on Explore. That leads to scoring at least a 21 on the ACT or 990 on the SAT. So as you can see, that is aligned across the tiers. Going back to the left-hand side, the completion of a technology portfolio. There are certain skills that elementary students need to possess in order to be successful in their in a digital environment as a digital citizen, but also on the PARCC assessment. That leads into the technology readiness that will be administered to incoming 5th graders and post-administrated when they leave in the 8th grade, to measure that technology readiness that is going to lead them to be successful in a digital environment as they complete online courses in the high school level. Going back to the left-hand side, every student in elementary participating in service learning projects that are designed as classes with their teachers, as a school, or groups of students in those elementary schools. Moving into the middle school, where they complete a service learning project through project-based learning, through groups, same as elementary, but they take it a little bit step further at that point, and they're completing them individual, which moves into the high school, where students have a choice, whether it's work-based, service learning, or research that they take through their capstone experience that's required of every graduate. Moving back to the left, the social emotional learning skills readiness. Again, rubrics will be put in place to measure social emotional learning experiences that the kids are having. Are they aware of themselves? Are they able to form relationships? And you've learned about the SEL components. That moves into the middle school, where it's extremely important that every middle school student be involved in something. We want during the school day, after school, before school, we want every student involved in at least one extracurricular activity, arts, sports. We're really working in Music Makes Us to create experiences for the students in music and the arts in middle school, but we're also working to create intramural and intramural opportunities for our kids throughout the days and after school. That leads into our high school students demonstrating that they're taking college credit courses, that they're taking graduating with nationally recognized professional certifications, or both. So as you can see, the experience for the students are aligned from when they enter kindergarten or pre-K all the way through that graduate of the things that they will possess, and then measurements are put in place behind that to measure the success of each of those initiatives and align it to our plan that you're learning about today. All right, so looking at the first one, grow, transform teaching and learning, utilizing personalized approaches that meet the unique strengths, needs, and interests of every learner. Again, this is about the student experience, the learner experience in the schools.
And one of the examples we want to share with you tonight is our focus on project-based learning. There are 8 components of PBL that guide teachers in creating lessons that are applicable to their student lives. PBL personalizes the learning by giving students a voice and a choice of how they demonstrate mastery, and by requiring a public audience for their work. MNPS has and continues to train every administrator and teacher in project-based learning.
And also, we're just highlighting points for you. There's much more detail. These are just highlights of it. Instructional technology and blended learning, and you notice that's in the characteristics. We're placing an emphasis on blended learning approaches to personalize the experience. High schools have moved the advanced curriculum already into Blackboard, which is an online system where course shells are built and kids can access the curriculum 24/7. Middle schools will transition to a digital environment where every child possesses a digital device with internet access, so the students have anytime access and may accelerate or remediate. That's a big shift. In our plan, every middle school student will have a device, a personal digital device, that gives them 24/7 access to digital curriculum. And we are working to transition many of our traditional courses using textbooks over to digital platforms such as elementary hands-on science. That's one of our first projects to work on this year. Through PBL and blended learning, we will revamp the hands-on science and put it in a digital environment so kids can access it from home. K-12 social studies, doing the same thing with social studies, letting teams of teachers develop digital resources that align to each standard and learning target. And then a new middle school course called High School 101 that launches in January, where students inside of Blackboard will learn what a GPA is, what our high schools offer, what are advanced courses, what's AP, International Baccalaureate, what does it take to graduate from high school. So they will start learning that in a High School 101 blended environment. And then the MNPS Virtual School continues to personalize the learning experience by offering students access to any course at any school from home or from school. The second one is achieve. Continuously increase the rigor and relevance of learning content and experiences for every learner.
As we look at rigor and relevance, we basically think about Common Core standards. And our K through 12 teachers have been hard at work at deconstructing the new Common Core standards. We have and we continue to develop scope and sequence guides that outline learning targets for each standard and available resources that are tied to exemplary lessons. All of this will be housed in a SchoolNet eventually and be available for every teacher to have access to. This process is ongoing, as you know, and is an ongoing learning experience, not only for us, but for everyone that will continue as we develop new lessons and new resources that will be identified.
Another example is advanced academics. Through project-based learning, we're raising expectations K-12 in every classroom. Every middle school will offer a minimum of one high school credit course that is in place for this year, and that will expand over the next 5 years. High schools are expanding advanced placement, college dual enrollment, international baccalaureate, and adding the Cambridge Advanced International Certificate of Education, and eventually moving into the middle schools with the ACE program. K-12 partnerships are being enhanced with organizations such as Vanderbilt Center for Science Outreach to redesign how science education is designed and delivered throughout our schools. We also have a new Advanced Academics and Talent Development Office that will be evaluating our offerings, including Encore, to ensure our students are receiving the highest levels of instruction. The third bullet is Empower. Empower learners with the knowledge to create their own goals and frequently monitor their own progress.
Many times you've heard us talk about social and emotional learning, and it's the process for helping our children and even adults develop the fundamental skills for life effectiveness. These are the skills we all need to handle ourselves, our relationships, and our work effectively and ethically. We are working to embed SEL in every aspect of the student and adult experience throughout MNPS, including student goal setting.
Another example is the continuous improvement philosophy. We are implementing the continuous improvement model in all schools with a focus on literacy. This model requires short formative assessments or checks for understanding, aligned with specific benchmarks. Adjustments in instruction are made based on the checks for understanding. This empowers the student to own their personal data and set goals for mastery with the teacher and the parent.
And we also have student data chats. And in all schools, teachers will have formal data chats with students after each formative assessment. This process will focus on the student's ownership of his or her data and goal setting in order to achieve mastery of each standard. It is our goal to give parents direct access to student data through SchoolNet once it is completely developed. Also, parent data chats led by students will be held at schools.
Okay, thank you, Brenda and Jay. I want to turn now to Susan, who is going to introduce quality teaching, the second lever of change.
Okay, and to do that, I'm a visual learner, and I know it's kind of hard, so I'm just going to, you got another handout from, I think, Tamara, which was deeper. It was the Excel spreadsheet, right? I'm just going to tell you where this lives so that you can find any of the specifics I'm going to give you. So when we were given the task, this is what we're looking at. We have a 12-box matrix, if you will, with the levers of change across the top with our age. That's how I remember it. It's achieve, grow, and empower on our left-hand side. And so as each of our divisions looked at it, where does our division live the best? Where do we have the biggest lever on these different 4 changes? So I just wanted to share that piece so you would kind of know where we were coming from. So I'm right here under quality teaching, looking at the achieve, grow, and empower pieces. And as we look at that first one, when we talk about the grow with the quality teaching, we talk about positive learning environments where high expectations, mastery of learning goals, and all of those things live. When we're really looking at that, not only are they looking at the competencies and the characteristics that they want from students, we're also looking at what competencies and characteristics are we needing from our teachers and from our leaders from a bigger standpoint. So what are we doing then from a human capital standpoint, if you will, to recruit those people? How are we looking for them? How are we finding them? And we know what we have to make sure that we can grow that achievement. We can grow through those pipelines and those types of things. We're looking for those particular competencies in teachers to make sure that they understand that formative assessments are important, those types of things, that they have a deeper knowledge about students, about our students, the ones that we're working with. In the human capital department, we're talking about hiring hard. We really want to be particular and recruit hard and really look for those highly effective, strong teachers. So that's when we look at that grow piece from the human capital standpoint, what we're looking at. When we go into the achieve, where we're wanting to make sure that everyone is a highly effective teacher, has a highly effective leader in front of them in all of our schools and all of our classrooms. That's when we really look at our evaluation system and the kind of supports that we have there. How are we continually improving? How are we growing that? How are we articulating that to everybody so that they have an understanding? We want strategic recruitment. We want to limit displacements. We want to ensure that we have 4s and 5s across the board. What is our leadership with our principals? How are we developing them so that they can do that? You know, I could take you into the actual document so that you can see this is what it looks like when you pop in on that Excel sheet and spread down and drill down. You're going to see on the left-hand side all of our divisions. You're going to see our strategies in the next column. Then you're going to see the kinds of activities that we're doing. And the other thing that you're going to notice that there's going to be some similarities because we are truly collaborating with each other and making sure that that happens so that we are communicating together. Not only do we have this to focus and drive our actions, but that we're communicating clearly on that. And then the third part on empower is that creating that culture of learning, collaboration, and shared accountability. We're looking at PLCs. Do we have the structures in place? What are we doing to help support that? And again, it goes back to that strategic recruitment for the leadership that we're also looking for that can help support those types of things. Strong principles, distributed leadership, how are we developing that? We're really trying to recognize where we have greatness and shine a light on that, and then try to make sure that we can eliminate those that are not quite so great in a legal, ethical, and moral way.
Comes this way. They're saying a lot in a hurry. Let me slow down just a minute. I'm going to pass the mic down to Chris and then back to the other side to Fred. But I want to say you probably recognize the fact that Tony Majors is not here. Tony had full knee replacement and just less than a week ago, so he's recovering. And Tony, if you're watching us on TV, we hope you're doing okay. The equity, and Tony has a major role to play in the equity and excellence lever of change. But I'll pass it down to Chris to start this conversation.
Regarding directing resources and supports to the specific needs of students, we briefly discussed during our budget process our transition of resource allocation to schools with the implementation of a pilot program for our school-based budgeting. And we did that with 17 of our schools. These would be the iZone principals and the network lead principals. So we are in the midst of that process and we'll be implementing that for this school year. Parallel to that, we are looking at implementing another tier of change, which would be a resource allocation based upon a weighted student funding formula, where different weights would be applied to different types of students and funding would follow the students to the different schools where they go. What we're doing is researching what other districts have been doing regarding best practices and lessons learned, not trying to recreate the wheel, but looking at it from the perspective of what is best for our schools. We know that all of our schools are different, they have different needs, and the school improvement plan lays out the goals and objectives for each of our schools and how they're going to direct their resources. And so we feel like it's been a positive first step with this pilot program. This pilot program affects approximately 10,000 of our students, and approximately $60 million has been put out there for schools with those 17 schools with their school-based process to determine where those dollars will go, rather than strictly basing it upon staffing formulas. And so we feel like it's been a learning process on both sides, and we look forward to continuing that and expanding that into the future and including more schools, and also, as I said, transitioning to a weighted student-based funding allocation.
Thanks, Chris. And I'll let Fred cover the last two.
The next one is expand all students' access to relevant learning content.
To go back to what Dr. Steele was talking about, this is where the technology portfolio and students tracking their own learning and their own progress fits in. It's holding each student accountable for their own learning and providing them, in this case, technology resources for getting digital content, and also being able to use technology to show what they know and to be able to demonstrate what they've learned. SchoolNet has been mentioned. SchoolNet is a piece of software available to all students and teachers over the next year. We are rolling out in pilot schools right now. It provides information to teachers about students. It's a repository for lesson planning. It's a repository for teacher-developed assessment instruments. Notice I didn't say test because it's not really a test, but teachers, when they finish a lesson, do what back in my day we called teacher-made tests to see what the kids know and how they need to adjust. So those mini assessments will be stored in SchoolNet and available to be shared with other teachers around the district. One of the big initiatives that we are undertaking to ensure this students' access to relevant learning, both in and out of school, is our Anytime Access for All initiative, where we are working on our 40% of our families that don't have internet access at home. It's a way of leveraging resources throughout the community and throughout the state. We're working with Connected Tennessee to develop ways to do that. A couple of really exciting possibilities right now, and Dr. Keisha Ray is going to Washington, D.C. next week to work on this, but E-rate funding, which is a federal schools and libraries program that provides technology access, is being considered to be expanded. And we want to be first in line because we already have a planning process and are developing a plan for Anytime Access for All. So that's on the horizon, but it's an exciting possibility. And our community is on the cutting edge of that opportunity. The other is a shift to e-learning, utilizing electronic digital content instead of textbooks. That is an area that is ripe for expansion. We are developing a specific plan for that in different areas right now. And also restructuring our libraries as media centers, as centers for learning in the school, where the librarians will become instructional development specialists in each school. It's what they are, it's what they've been trained to do. We're working on using them in a different way to deliver digital content. And I did not have the last section, which was Tony's. So,
I got it. Sorry, I didn't mean to lay that one on you. Jenny Pooper-Walker.
I was going to make something up really good. Make Tony do it.
Jenny and Allison MacArthur are here to present Tony's part.
So first, Tony wanted to send his apologies. He really wanted to be here tonight, so he said he's sorry he couldn't make it, and he would rather be here than be kind of cooped up in the bed. I'm going to start out by saying that Community Achieves is kind of our organizing framework to maximize parent and community partnerships. We feel like that is a framework to ensure that students are successful and that they can meet their academic goals. Our goal is to really add to that personalization piece through our partnerships, programs, and interventions.
The work in support services really centers on collaborating across departments and with every school, and so our goal this year is to really begin to intentionally provide what we call cluster support services at every school. We have this year really taking to another level what we call our support and intervention process, which are 6 meetings a year held at every single school, where we have social workers, truancy folks, family involvement folks around the table with principals, counselors, talking about kids most in need and strategies. We all walk away with sort of an action plan for kids most at risk. Our social workers this year are really going to expand group counseling across the district through a wide track program we're developing. Our extended learning after-school programs are really partnering more intentionally with all of our after-school providers, whether they're run by our staff or by partners in the community, really working with them this year on helping them understand Common Core, PBL, and really trying to align to the school day much more intentionally. We're also really expanding services and partnerships with parents through the Parent Advisory Council, local leadership at the school level, through family resource centers, and many other approaches that we're developing. So we really feel that we're weaving SEL, social emotional learning, throughout all of our practices and support services, and our goal is to allow teachers to do what they do best and let us support students where they are.
Just a few of those SEL, social emotional learning things that we have going on. We've got the LVS bullying program where we're training schools to use that. Poverty simulations, we've worked with central office and schools so that they really understand the issues that families face that live in poverty. And then the parent leadership trainings that Jeannie mentioned. And one thing that we realized is that MNPS can't do it alone. So in order to be stronger and more effective, we've really developed some strong partnerships. So a lot of our partnerships fall in other areas of Metro government, MDHA, Metro Social Services, the Health Department, NASA, Criminal Court Clerk, DCS, working very strategically with us. We've also got lots of nonprofits. I could never mention them all, but some of the big ones that have really walked hand in hand with us, being strategic. How can we really leverage other partners? Alignment Nashville, United Way, Pencil, Connexion Americas, and Family and Children's Services. So, like Jay mentioned, we've spent a lot of time action planning. We've done that over the summer, really being intentional on how can support services support the other departments in MNPS. And we really feel like that our assistants can really help personalize that learning so that teachers can focus on quality teaching and our other stakeholders can really help support the schools transform and improve.
Thank you very much. There you have a slide, Grow, Achieve, and Empower, that Lisa will put up right now. Go to the next one, Lisa, if you will. That one.
You just skipped transformational leadership.
I just skipped transformational leadership. All right. Okay. Oh yeah, we got a couple of things to say about this.
Yeah, these are big ones.
Structurally, we now have 12 lead principals that are school-based in the district. We've added a number this summer, and we feel really good about developing that school-based instructional leadership and the school networks. Our goal is over the next 2 years is to go district-wide with that, to grow our leadership capacity in that area. And I'm going to turn it over to Jay to talk about the next two.
Yes, the Achieve is create a culture of continuous improvement and maintain a positive school climate through distributed and collaborative leadership. As Dr. Register referenced the lead concept, I'm very proud of this. I think we're all very proud of this. We've worked very hard to develop our principles, and we have implemented a shared leadership approach called the Network Lead. There are three, it's a 3-year project that we're going into this first year of, but that will identify and empower school-based principals, master principals, that have earned that right. They've applied for it, they've been interviewed and selected, and we're placing them in leadership roles to support their colleagues. 12 principals have been identified to lead networks of 4 to 5 schools, and 52 schools are currently in the networks for this year. The goal is, over 3 years, 100% of our schools will belong to the networks and be led by school-based principals. We feel this approach will move the decision-making closer to the schools, and research shows this model is effective on student achievement and performance measurements. This network will also assist us in the strategic recruitment of high-performing leaders. We are also working on K-12 literacy and numeracy plans that are being finalized now. And we feel like these approaches and initiatives will definitely lead to more collaboration.
As we talk more about lead networks, we have a lead coach network. We're taking a bold step in our transformation by moving away from a central office model of curriculum coordinators to a school-based model of 16 lead coaches. These 16 school-based master teachers will be the facilitators of professional learning, communities focusing on student achievement, best practices, key instructional resources, student interventions and enrichments, and any decision around teaching and learning.
We've also worked very hard in developing our school-based leadership teams, and that's a process that will continue on in collaborative meetings with our principals. We've been actively empowering the principals to develop and implement school-based leadership teams, and that is an expectation, and every school has a leadership team that is continuing to develop. These collaborative teams use school data to make decisions at the school level with support from the central office.
We also have leadership institutes. Our principal leadership institutes will focus on the development of the instructional leader and will be designed by principals and with the assistance of our human capital department. The Teacher Leadership Institute is designed also for our third-year teachers to develop leadership skills and their talents. We plan to leverage our top-tier teachers to design and enact transformation in our schools.
And the third one is empower. Expand opportunities for students, parents, and teachers to use their talents, skills, and experiences to support school improvement. We are completely redesigning the school improvement process, the way the teams are configured, the way the plans are designed, and the way they're implemented and measured. That process is being led by Dr. Julie McCarger and the school improvement team. Another example we'll share with you tonight is the ambassador program. I think all of you have been in our high schools and you've met our student ambassadors. We are expanding that program into the middle schools for this coming year. And the high school ambassadors will facilitate the middle school training and present, after the middle school student finishes their training, the high school ambassador will present the blue jacket that you've seen to the middle school student, empowering them to lead that next step into their schools. We're also creating a high school parent ambassador program this year and hope to expand that into the other tiers over the next future years. Things like internships, scientists in the classroom, youth courts, entrepreneurial centers, and many other programs are really changing the experience, leadership experiences our kids are having in the schools, and we're very proud to work with many community partners to implement all of the change that's happening.
You were introduced earlier to the characteristics of an elementary, middle, and high school student as they exit each tier. And one of the characteristics of is experiential learning, and in the elementary and middle, we focus on service learning, whereas the high schools will focus on service, work-based, and research by implementing the capstone experience for every student. We feel this experience will assist in the development of leadership talents in all our youth.
Okay, that was to take 30 minutes, and it took an hour. And I guess the thing I'd like to say about that is that this first, you see a graph here that really focuses on our 12 core strategies in the strategic plan. We could spend an hour on each of these 12. I don't think we have 12 hours to spend now. And I apologize for throwing so much at you so quickly. I can't talk this fast very long. You know, I need to slow down a little bit, and I think we need time to think about this too. It's not really planned as a public presentation, but to try to give you a good overview of where we are. Next steps for us, it's important for you to look at this and to drill into it, to look at the key strategies, the strategic action plans that we have, to ask questions, to modify, to make recommendations, and then we would like to publicly approve this and for our principals to share it with our faculties. It's really important that we realize that the people in this room can't make this happen. It's too broad, it's too encompassing. So we think it's very important now that we roll this out to all of our faculties, and as a part of that process, as we go forward, we'll develop presentations for use by board and administration, and hopefully give you something that you can take to different communities to make the presentation. I'll ask Lisa and Tamara to help with any questions you might have about the strategic dashboard. That is the document that we haven't talked about, but the one that drills into specific strategies. So at this time, we'll be glad to answer any questions you might have.
I tell you what, I don't think I've ever seen this group of people talk so quickly. I was trying to keep up with you guys. Any questions from board members? Okay, Ms. Spearing.
Yes, I just want to say that I think you've done a great job at explaining this. I have more questions on the how, and I know that it's a work in progress, and you may not have all the answers on the how. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think it's a living document. I don't think we'll ever be through with it. We are looking at strategically how we update you on a monthly basis on progress that's being made. Lisa and Tamara, you might want to speak to that.
Yeah, I think, just this is going to continuously improve and evolve, and especially as we get kind of deeper into this. And this basis, I think the takeaway is that we are not producing a final kind of perfect product here. What this is really intended to do is kind of outline the vision of where we're going and the kind of high levers of change that we think are going to get us there. So while I will say, though, all of the divisions have done extensive work creating their own strategic action plans, and there's a lot more detail behind this. You've seen some of it in the dashboard that you have, but there's a lot more to come, and there's a lot more that's currently in development right now.
So as you dig into that, and I don't know if you have copies of this, paper copies of this or not. If you do, you'll see that the action steps are delineated in all of these areas.
And I wanted to mention, I'm very intrigued by the idea of ensuring equity of resources and the various weights and funding allocations going to varying degrees of poverty. I'd like to hear more about that. Is that something you can talk about now, or is that something we need to talk about later? But this sounds like, this is very exciting to me to think about putting more money where our greatest needs are.
It's a process that we are just undertaking. The first, I guess, tier of the change was implementing school-based budgeting with those 17 pilot schools. And along with that is the conversion of looking at the weighted student funding where, for instance, an exceptional education student would have a higher weight than a regular education student, and an English learner student would have a higher weight than a regular education student. We need to go through a process where we determine what those weights should be, and again, that's where we're looking at researching best practices regarding what other districts have done and the changes that they've made throughout their process, so that we don't, again, no reason to recreate the wheel if we've got some districts who are already out there doing something similar and learning from them. And so it's something, that piece is something that we've just started to embark upon. The first step was the school-based budgeting, where we give principals flexibility and discretion over how to utilize their funds. And then the second part would be on the resource allocation relating to weighted student funding. And that's something that we'll be looking to implement into the future, not something that we've undertaken for this year.
Okay, so it won't be implemented this year?
No.
When do you anticipate that this funding will be in process?
Well, we're going to look and see the results of the pilot with the 17 schools and see how that works first. I don't have an estimated date. I don't want to tell you that we're for sure going to be looking at doing that in 14-15. It's something that we'll continue to monitor as we put more schools into the school-based process. 17 out of 140 or 150 is just a small number, but it does represent, as I mentioned, 10,000 students and over $60 million that was put out for principals to have flexibility and discretion. And so we're trying to be patient, and we're trying to put it out there in a process where we don't put too much on principals at once, where they don't have proper support and training on how to implement what we're wanting them to do to give them that autonomy. And so we'll be providing updates to you as we move forward in that process.
Thank you.
Ms. Shepherd?
I have a gazillion questions, but I'll cut y'all some slack. I think, Dr. Stowe, you mentioned about every middle school student having a digital device. Do you know when that might be rolled out?
Fred and I, our departments are collaborating on this, and we are hoping a 2 to 3 year period. I don't want to state it's going to be in 2 years, but our plan is to start with 5th grade and phase that in. So we're hoping within the next 2 to 3 years that we can make that happen. Again, that depends on resources.
Okay. And to the, I believe you spoke about this also, the achieve part of every high school student taking a college class. Are we partnering with local colleges to make that happen on the high school campus or on the college campus? Or
Both. We are partnering with Ball State and Nashville State Community Colleges to offer both electronically or virtually, also on the high school campus, and students going to the college campus, so all three. And we've recently hired a college dual enrollment counselor that's working the liaison between those university or those community colleges and the high schools to get those courses up. We have several hundreds of students that are already taking those courses. We're hoping to expand it, and it's also already available in every school. We just don't have large numbers of students doing it, but it's all three platforms.
appreciate that.
Any additional questions? Mr. Hayes?
Thank you. I was wondering, Dr. Shangus, if you talked about 16% today, I guess our students today, so this would be last year's scored up on the Explore test or some sort of predictors test.
It's that 16% is coming from value-added projections. It's based on their TCAP history. It's
fourth grader, third grader.
It's 3rd through 8th grade.
So if we try to take a 3rd grade snapshot, is that a 16%?
It's very close. It may be slightly higher than that. We have it grade by grade, but it's if I recall, it's probably a little closer to 20% than 16 at the 3rd grade.
Was there discussion amongst all the parties who worked on this document? I think it's a great document. I'm thrilled to see aggressive goals, but around breaking up both elementary and middle predictor scores. And where I'm going with this is it's hard for me, right, to say to a constituent or to a parent, to a friend, that I can't promise that 5 years from now, our goal will be for your child entering 1st grade to be proficient, right? I mean, is there a way to break that? So somebody today, 5 years from now, that student who would take the test in 3rd grade and predict towards a 21 hasn't entered our program yet. Can we start with 1st grade and look at, did you talk about that, breaking into elementary and middle school and setting a more aggressive goal for elementary so that we could try to get a bigger, and I know 16%, right, to go from 16% it's a big task to get to 40.
Yeah.
But if I think about kids who haven't even started our program yet,
yeah. I believe what we're talking about here is following cohorts over time. And so when we talk about going from 16 to 40, that's to get them prepared, a larger percentage of students prepared going into high school. And from that point on, we would hopefully see continued growth. We've had some discussion, and we certainly are interested in looking at that. I can tell you that this last year was the first year we had the data electronically on these projections, so we haven't had a chance to really track over time what that movement looks like, but that's something we will be doing. But I would hope, when we're talking about elementary age students, and we don't get data on those projections until they've taken the TCAP in the 3rd grade, and that becomes our baseline. But I would hope that that group of students that's a 3rd grade or below, that number is going to be a lot higher as we look at their progress down the road. We will certainly be happy to study that and bring that back to you this year, as we'll be getting another set of data soon that will give us a second data point in terms of that projection.
And that's my hope, is that that this group would really consider that, and maybe it's a tiered approach to where somebody 5 years from now in the 3rd grade might be a little higher than somebody in the 4th grade or the 5th grade or the 6th grade.
Absolutely, and as we presented tonight, we have growth targets that talk about raising proficiency at a rate greater than the state. That's moving students, from 50, from actually a little below 50% of our students that are on pace with students statewide now to moving an additional 2% a year. So we are hoping that growth will be compounded over time and that we get more students there. Absolutely, we will be looking at that. I can tell you none of us is satisfied with 40%. It's an intermediate goal and a fairly ambitious one from where we are. We have a lot of students that are not at that threshold, which is only about a third of Tennessee students are at that point right now. But we have a lot that are a little bit below that point. And obviously, the earlier we identify that and make that growth, the better. But we will look at that.
Well, and that's my thought, right? The people who will take this test 5 years from now in the 3rd grade haven't entered yet.
Yes.
And I would hope that those kids that are 3 years old now, right, or 4 years old now, and who in 5 years will be 3rd graders, we'd have a higher goal than 40%.
Absolutely.
Because they haven't even come into the system.
No, absolutely. I think that's the anticipation that we have. What we're talking about, right now is a cohort across multiple grades and we're talking about getting to that point by the time they exit the 8th grade and make growth from there. But we will look at it on a class of basis, class of 2020, 2021, following that cohort over time.
Another question, just before we approve this, I assume that more of the columns to the right, the measurable outcomes, the lead person, start date, end date, that would all be populated. This also would have a lot more information in them than they do now. Is that right?
A lot of that information actually already exists. We were trying to figure out how to kind of streamline the amount of information we provided to you today. But a good example would be Jay's area. He has additional plans as far as for English learners, for exceptional ed, that have been basically summarized K-12 to show you the work that's going on across all his areas. But all the information is available, and we're trying to basically continue to improve the way we're presenting the information to you. So if what in the memo that you received with the documentation, how it says the information you received will look different 2 weeks from now, a month from now, that's definitely true. We're basically trying to improve the way we present the information.
We, of course, this year's scores form the baseline for a lot of these areas, and this data is coming in now. It just hasn't been entered yet, I'll say. Other questions?
Ms. Rowe?
I had a few. First of all, thank you for the presentation. It's obviously a lot of time and thought has been put into this plan. My first question I want to ask is about the school improvement plan. I forgot who presented that, but does every school have a school improvement plan in place right now?
Yes.
Okay, because I think that's a fantastic vehicle for community members, parents that want to partner with the schools, to have, clear place to put their resources and time and energy. I don't know if we are reaching out to community partners with the school improvement plan.
Well, we are trying to move away from a compliance document to a real action document, and so that's why we're redesigning what the status of it currently is in. It is more of a compliance document that the state requires. We are trying to move to a document that is a living and breathing document that guides the work in the school, that has parents and a student voice on the team with community partners. So that process is completely being redesigned. It will be unveiled probably in the 1st of September to the principals of what that will look like.
And so, but will the plan list the needs of what the school has? And
it is based on their achievement data, and that will drive what the needs are. Okay.
I mean, I'm thinking just even as in facilities needs or those sorts of things. Are those included in the plan?
I don't think facility needs are included in the school improvement plan. It's all instructional.
It's all instructional. Okay.
There might be some cultural climate in it, but it's not facilities.
Okay.
In its current format. So.
Okay. All right. And on the 17 schools that are currently in the pilot program, are the principals right now given complete autonomy on spending, directing resources?
what we did was calculate the flexibility of their total funding, and what we have is an average of 92% of their total funding. Usually the only thing that is not discretionary is the principal position. We do tell each school they have to have a principal. And there may be a couple of other things that we say are what's the term that we use?
Non-negotiables.
That are non-discretionary as far as what they have to do, but the vast majority of the funds, it's basically a lump sum amount, where, of course, the school has to meet state law as it relates to student-teacher ratio. And so that drives a lot of the resources that are allocated to the schools. They have to meet a certain number of teachers. But as far as other types of positions, or if they would rather have things like technology and equipment or other things rather than positions, or the different types of positions, that is totally up to the principal as far as providing them that discretion on how they, based upon the school's school improvement plan and the goals and objectives that are set out in that school improvement plan. That should drive everything they do, including how they budget and spend their money.
And how quickly are you planning to expand that program?
Well, we're going to talk about how many more we want to have for next year. This is the first year we've had this pilot program. We haven't decided yet. We'll make that decision on into the fall and winter as we start beginning our discussions as it relates to next year's budget. How many more we feel like are manageable, how many more we feel like are ready to take this on. We felt like it was important to begin with the iZone principals and the network lead principals because they should have the most autonomy, and we believe they are up to the challenge as far as the responsibilities associated with this process.
And I've got a lot more too, but I'll stop after this one. This is a lot of information, so I may have misheard you, but did you say that in 100% of schools in 3 years will be governed by lead principals?
Yeah, they'll be led by the network lead principals. That is our plan.
That's pretty significant.
Mm-hmm. This current year, all high schools are led by lead principals. The plan is for year 2 is middle, and year 3 would be elementary.
Any additional questions? I'll wrap it up with one. Oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question? Go ahead. Ms. Kim.
So, as a leadership team collectively, what, in a super colloquial 2-bullet summary, what are your theories based on reams of research and our own knowledge of bright spots within the district of what are the key levers for driving student achievement?
The ones that we're looking at and the ones that we've identified are personalized learning, quality teaching, equity, and transformational leadership. Those are the ones that we've focused on. Now, each of those is multifaceted, but that's the way we categorize them.
I guess what I'm going to push just a little bit more here in terms of if you had to boil it down just to see my opposition.
We already have the greatest kids, so all we have to do is put the greatest teachers with the greatest leaders in front of them. And that is what our focus is on, is making sure that we have great teachers in front of those kids every single day, doing what it takes to make sure that they can be the greatest potential they can possibly be, led by great leaders that support them and get out of their way and let them do that. I mean, that, if you're talking about succinctly, that's what drives us. And all these other pieces are major levers that we feel will really support us in getting there. You already saw transformational leadership and quality teaching as two of the big levers. We also talk about equity and access, make sure we have that across the way. And it's personalized not only down to personalized learning for students, personalized learning for teachers, personalized learning for the leaders. What do I need to grow and to be the best, the highest quality that I can be in front of those kids? So that's how I would say it in a nutshell, without looking at any kind of chart, graph, matrix, or whatever. Then that drives the work. And that's what focuses on what's in front of those children every day. And I don't know if that's what you're looking for or not, but that's how we look at it in a nutshell.
I want to say one word, it's empowerment. I do feel like the Dr. Register empowers each of us to make decisions, to lead change, to be transformational, and I think it's our job to empower the principals. They empower the teachers empower the students. I think empowerment embodies everything that we're talking about today, because the true change comes from within the classroom and up, not from us down. And I think that empowerment of the classroom teacher, the principal, to make decisions that are best for their students based on their own data drives the decisions in every decision we make as a district.
I saw a head nodding at various, yeah. Did other people want to answer? I'm just curious too.
I think just to agree that that change is in the classrooms. That's where we're going to make a difference, and that's why we need to focus on what happens in each classroom. That connection between the quality teacher and the students is where that is our key lever of change. But we have to empower and we have to provide resources, and we have to do that equitably across the district. So it's a giant puzzle where to be successful, all the pieces have to fit together. And that's what we're trying to do under the plan, is to make sure that all of the pieces fit into the whole, which will be our successful school district.
So, to say something that I think is very significant too, that's fundamental, is it's for us to create a different culture, to create an organizational culture of continuous improvement, one where we work every day to do better than we did yesterday and to organize it. And I think that's vision and culture. And I think we've got a ways to go, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you for answering that. It's interesting, and I happen to agree with your nutshell assessment. But there's variations of how people express it. It's the people in the building, it's in the classrooms, leading the schools, creating the culture, casting a vision that inspires people to get behind it and to achieve great things for our kids. And so that to me does sum up what we're trying to do, is to create that, whatever that is. And this is, such thoughtful, great work, and I agree there's like many moving parts and they all need to come together because there's no such thing as one silver bullet. At the same time, that, what we're sort of summarizing, doesn't to me pop. Like in a way where the average parent could quickly look at this and say, I know what the business is about. Like, this is our theory of how we're going to actually change the system. And the reason I persist on this point is because, to your point, Dr. Register, of all the previous work that's been done, the countless, we've all had seen the PowerPoints, hundreds of pages, all of us have experienced it in our workplaces, which can gather dust. Or we execute them really well. There's different ways that people interact with them, and then what we learn is what we learn. And so presumably, this is my next question, there would be differences between what we embarked on last time, on paper anyway, and this. And what would be those key differences? Like the theory being that
there have been many strategies that have been abandoned, and I'll ask my colleagues to think about some of those that we've abandoned. But when we started with MNPS Achieves, and once we got into it, we had about 65 initiatives, and we found those that work. We think this embodies those that work. It's more narrowly focused. Now it's growing. It's an inductive process, but now it's growing, and we feel like we're really finding those strategies that we think can produce results. And some of you want to speak to that.
When back in February, when the reorganization happened, and it brought together leadership and learning, instructional support and federal programs, the innovation, iZone schools, all of those departments fell in Chief Academic Officer's role. We came in this room, and many of the people are in here, and we put up blue walls in the back. We listed we filled up 3 walls of initiatives that were happening in the different, just those 4 different groups within leadership and learning. It was massive. We narrowed that down to 14. These are 14 things that we're high yield, high probability strategies that we're going to focus on and create 3-year action plans on those that are leading to the goals within the strategic plan. Those action items drive what we do. That's how I hold Brenda accountable, Dottie Critchlow accountable, and all the people in the room that are a part of leadership and learning. They know what their work plan looks like. They know what the end goal is, who's responsible for it, and what resources. I know what resources they need to implement that change. Those plans will be published in the next 2 weeks to any of you. There are 14 of them, and it grew from hundreds down to 14. I think that narrow and focus was extremely important for our group to do to get the K-12 alignment.
The restructuring of the central office is very important. I had 14 direct reports, and we were not collaborative and coordinated to the extent that we need to be. I think the restructuring now is working very well. I'm very pleased with where we've come, and I think in terms of looking at overall organization about what's changed, what's changing now, it's really leadership and learning and human capital that are developing the most right now. The history is that we've had an independent consultant, a business consultant come in. We've completely reworked our business practices already. Those are implemented now. Our federal programs management has been completely restructured. We were one of the high priority districts in the country in federal programs operations 3 years ago. They told us it would take us 5 to move into good standing. Our practices are exemplary now, and we're in good standing. Our learning technology plan, our technology plans, very well developed. So a lot of the business practices, a lot of the support systems that we have are further along than where we need to go with leadership and learning and human capital. So those have been the focus of the change for the last 6 months.
If I can, Lisa, I wanted to just over here take a stab at this and just thinking about the system as a whole and being a part of a lot of the efforts that have gone on in the last few years and where we are now. And I think there are a few things that are really different and distinct about the plan now, and we may need to think about, kind of getting some feedback on how we can make that pop more. But I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is, as opposed to prior reform movements here and elsewhere, this is not a plan that is program focused. We're not saying, okay, all of a sudden we're going to do this and we think it's going to change the world. So for instance, even one of the things that was mentioned was blended learning and technology. Now, we're not putting all our eggs in that basket, but we think to do that, and as one strategy, we can reach a bigger goal. So this is much more about changing practice, changing how we do things, and not just trying to apply specific programs. I think another significant difference is I don't think there has ever been this much effort focused on actually asking students what they think, engaging students. We're about students, but I think often adults make decisions, and students may not be engaged, they may not find their learning relevant, and so this plan elevates students, the students' voice, student engagement, to a new level that I don't think that we've seen. So I think that's another piece that's a significant difference. And then in terms of what we're about and people, I think this plan doesn't just say we need great teachers and great leaders. It's actually focused on, okay, what is it that we're looking for? What are those competencies? What are those beliefs and values that we really want? What does top talent really mean? And so that's the outlining of personalization of having relationships with students. These capacities that we're trying to expand as a system is what we're looking for in people. So for instance, the conversations around strategic recruitment and a profile of who is it that we're looking for? How do we do this? I mean, that's a new way of thinking that, again, gets more down to a level of really changing culture and practice in a meaningful way.
Thanks, Lisa. Well, let me say one thing. Before we get too deep into this, we still have another topic on the agenda, and we've got 2 more people with us. If any additional questions, what we're going to do put those, send those to Ms. Hawkins, and she'll get them to the executive staff. So go ahead, and then Dr. Gentry and Ms. Shepherd.
All right, so yeah, this is so important. All that made sense to me, Lisa, and I understand the sloughing off. That makes a ton of sense as well, and absolutely necessary. There's something, I guess for me when I talk, so what you just said about people, like we're in a people business. Everything is about the people. It's about our kids front and center. It's about the adults that are in front of those kids. It's about the adults who are leading those other adults. And there are treasures, and we have literally thousands of teachers in this system who are doing fabulous work. And in all the debates, we're about, you know, the few that may need to get moved on, and then the few like unicorns over here on this spectrum. Like what's lost in the middle is like, you know, good warriors who are doing awesome work for our kids. And the notion of like treating them as treasures, like truly, like shepherding them through so that they get the professional development they need, they become their absolute best selves, you know, that we create, like we are going to do everything we possibly can to create an environment where they want to stay. They love MNPS, they love the school they're in, they love it so much that despite the challenges that they face every day, and they do, you know, they want to stay. And I guess that's the part that I'm saying is not popping to me. And so when we're in such, like, the core of the business is about our people and loving them and supporting them and getting them what they need to just be fabulous. Like, that to me is not popping. And not that I'm saying that we need to have love and support and a strategic plan. I mean, I fully understand this, but like that feel is I guess what I'm trying to communicate is, yeah, so what you were communicating to me, yes, I get. But even here, like, I didn't even see the recruitment, like the full-on, you know, notion of like we hire 600 people a year. We better darn well believe that the absolute best we've ever seen. Let's make sure the 600 every year are fantastic. Like that didn't pop in here. And then all the pieces are on supporting them once they're in the door. So anyway, we're all sort of saying variation of the same thing. I just want my
Yeah, very, very well made point. And I think you're exactly right. And I think what you're saying is contained in this strategic plan. The human capital development that we've talked about really focuses on recruiting, retaining, keeping, developing the very best people that we can. I think the perfect example is the Teacher Leadership Institute that we've started. We have identified very bright young people who typically leave our school system and go to other jobs, other professions, and we're beginning to get them to stay, and we're giving them opportunities to grow. And we're now into our third cohort with this, and they're already making a tremendous difference in our system. So the next topic that we have, teacher evaluation, it is a waste of time if we evaluate every teacher every year with 4 observations and all we're focusing on is getting rid of bad people. It is about improving practice. It is the positive side of that. And what we say to principals is if you don't spend 75% of your time improving practice, focusing on best practice, then you're not spending enough time on that. You shouldn't spend over 25% of your time on dealing with inadequate performance. But we need to be able to do that also. So very well made point. And I think, and we'll certainly attend to that. And I think, you know, the other thing I'd like to say is that we have to develop, we have to be able to present this to the public. The characteristics of the students who leaving elementary, middle, and high is very important to us because we want to create a vision for our parents of what we want our young people to experience and to be like and to have as they move from one level into another. And so I think the communications of this is very important as we go forward. Dr. Gentry.
Thank you. So we're on the same page. And what I guess the way that I looked at it or didn't see it in the plan or expected to see it, we have these things as linear, concurrent activities, but they're almost hierarchical from the perspective of the teachers, because until we get the quality teachers across the board, some of those other things are going to continue to be a challenge for us from the perspective of the academic performance of our students. I think it's kind of fair and almost obvious to say that. So in the strategic plan, sort of expanding, I guess piggybacking on what Elisa said, is I would expect to see some way where we're compensating for that not being in existence until it gets in existence. So almost something that's happening in the performance and on our student side that kind of shifts as the quality of our teachers, that our depth in that area grows. Does that make sense? Because right now it's all on an even plane, and we're going to be, in my mind, we are inherently challenged to reach our academic performance goals if we're still trying to reach our quality teacher in every classroom goal. Does that make sense? So that's what I would kind of was looking for, would be looking for in the how when we start to populate this and can see it somewhere. This is not something that you have to answer right now, but I would like us to consider the school improvement plans. I come up with my own little acronym here. Sort of a strategic school improvement plan that sort of looks just like this. So why would we create new categories and have a new, see there, I got a one head bob and one, that's what I'm talking about. Why would we, I would just say it would be sort of a cascade of this. Instead of trying to figure out and recreate it, it looks just like this because we need to do this. If we don't do these things on a school level, we won't recognize them on a district level. So I'm being lazy maybe. I just would like to drill down and get to what's going on at a particular school in District 1 to achieve these things.
So I'd like to respond to that if I may.
To Cheryl, because
may I respond to that?
You may respond.
I think the key to doing what you're talking about is developing shared ownership in the plan, and we started this summer at our Summer Principals Leadership Institute by presenting this and then giving them an opportunity to discuss the plan amongst themselves and to give us feedback. And we had very positive feedback from our principals. I'll go back to what I said earlier. If it's just us, if it's just the people in this circle, then it won't be successful. And I think developing that shared ownership and with our principals and with our teachers as we go forward is extremely important in doing what you're talking about. It should be one plan.
Right. And I know that Ms. Frogue asked about facilities and needs. I would expect to see those there as well. I mean, everyone can tell you, and I talk about the schools in District 1 all the time, and the needs that are there from a facilities perspective are great. And I think it all needs to fold into there. If we believe that we put the money we put into improving facilities because we believe it has an impact on academic performance, on the culture of the school, on people's willingness to come into the schools and be the partners that we're needing them to be, then facilities is as significant to that as putting a quality teacher in the classroom. So I would like to not see a separate facilities plan. I would like to see it as a part of the strategic school improvement plan as well. Not going to say much more about the weighted student funding, but definitely looking forward to that. And I'd also like to see what are we doing to facilitate some of these things as I look on the handout that you had, Jay, for our homeless students, because they are inherently incapable of doing a significant number of the things that we are trying to achieve on here. And although there are roughly 2,800 of them in our district today, they're still significant, regardless whether it was 800 or 2,800. And I would like to see in the plan, how do we supplement for those students who inherently, by definition, and I hope we don't think of homeless students and students in poverty as the same, because it's totally different. And what are we doing to help facilitate? If I pick just one, participation in extracurricular activities is a significant challenge for our homeless student population. So I would like to see some pointed action steps around how we engage those students if we believe that these are the characteristics of a successful MNPS student. That's all I have. Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you. Susan, you said, you used a terminology that I appreciated when you said hiring hard for our new teachers. Approximately how many teachers will we hire this summer?
Around 600. Shereen, what was the actual number we've done so far?
480.
We've done 480 right now.
We've done 480. And have we already incorporated that philosophy with these teachers that are coming in this year?
We always look at the characteristics, and we're holding the line a little bit harder. I don't know that as hard as we need to, but definitely not as hard as it's going to be. We set that criteria because we feel that if we do that work up front, it just improves the entire process all the way through. And that is really the focus our recruiters are looking at, and we work with
leadership and learning, every week we meet together on staffing and those types of issues. But yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to wrap this up. Will any other comments, please send them to Ms. Hawkins, and she will compile them and get them to the executive staff. I do want to make one closing comment before we move on to the next thing. Regarding the characteristics of an MNPS student, I agree with both Mr. Hayes and Dr. Gentry on this. My concern here is that statistical data shows that by the time these kids get to third grade, there's already prisons being built to house them once they graduate. What are we doing before third grade to get them ready to take these tests? Are we working with child care centers, preschool centers? What are we doing to make sure that these kids don't fall through the gaps? And I think, Jay, you mentioned attendance and behavior as two indicators. Are we constantly looking at those indicators to make sure that these children are not falling through the gaps? I don't need an answer on that. I just wanted to put it out there. And one final thing, Lisa, where'd she go? She was there a second ago. You said something that made me think of a story that I was recently involved in with a student in Antioch. I was sitting in a community meeting, and we were having a roundtable discussion, and every table had a student sitting at that table. And the young lady that was sitting next to me was not participating. And I said to her, "Why are you not participating?" And she said, "Because nobody wants to know what I think." And I said, "You are incorrect, because the reason we're here is because everything we're doing is for your future, so you have a stake at this table as well." And it wasn't until then that she started speaking up and wanted to be more involved with it. So thank you, everyone, for focusing more on our students and getting them more involved in the process. So with that, we'll move on.
Can I make a request? I mean, this is good. I'm going to save my questions and wrap them through Ms. Hawkins, but I don't feel like we spent nearly enough time exploring this tonight. And I know
We could spend another couple of hours.
And I know we've got another topic to cover, so I would just like to put in the formal request that we come back and have part 2 to this conversation. I've got a gazillion questions that can't necessarily be transmitted over email effectively, and it would require a conversation. So I just want to lob in the request to have a
And I
part 2.
think we may even have a part 3 on this one. There's a lot of information that we don't have, so definitely, I am definitely on board with that. So, Dr. Register.
Okay, thank you. Next topic's teacher evaluation, and we're shifting seats, except for me and Susan. While we are making the change, I think Mr. Pinkston, your comments very appropriate, and it's really a challenge. I don't like to do presentations like we did tonight. They're much better in conversation and in discussion, and we need to think about a different format, ways that we can do that. We can make executive staff available for some periods of time for individuals to come in, but we'll think about a different way to have discussions and answer questions as we go forward. So, welcome everyone. Teacher evaluation. I want to just tee this one up a minute, and then I'm going to hand it over to Susan, and then I'll let Susan recognize our other folks who are at the table and conduct the meeting. It hasn't been very long in Tennessee. We have just moved from the evaluation of tenured teachers being required once every 5 years. A tenured teacher had to be evaluated once every 5 years, to an evaluation system where every teacher is required to have an evaluation every year. 50% of that based on student achievement. We're into our 3rd year. We've completed 2 years of that, and it's a sea change. It's a tremendous change in this state, and I think a very positive change as we go forward. I'll say to you again that what I said earlier, it's a waste of time and energy if it's only about finding a few bad teachers. Most of our teachers are great teachers. What the work has to be about is improving practice. And I think the behaviors of our leaders, our principals, the training that they've received as instructional leaders, as good coaches, as good observers, has really begun to move us significantly forward in this attempt. Team evaluation, TEAM is the name of the state evaluation system, requires a tremendous amount of time. And we've put a tremendous amount of time into training our principals in our district. The evaluation process is multifaceted. There are several components to that, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity tonight. I really am glad that we have the opportunity tonight to talk about this, to talk about what the process looks like, to talk about how we implement team evaluation, and about our due process system. So Susan and Katie are going to make a presentation on team evaluation, and then we'll talk about due process after we get through with that. I think we have a couple of principals in the room who are the experts on team evaluation, and we can ask them if they'd like to. I also want to introduce, I'm talking to my back here, but Dr. Dottie Critchlow, who is now the Executive Officer for Student Support. She was a lead principal last year, and can add quite a bit to the conversation too. Dottie, welcome and congratulations. So I'm going to turn it over to Susan now, and we'll get on with the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Register. Up here at the table with us is Kathy Sinbeck, who is with Metro Legal, who has given us a great deal of support during this hiring season, the end of the season, and looking through all of our team evaluations and our processes and keeps us in a line. And she'll present to you our due process and how we go through the legal procedures through human capital. And then, of course, you know Katie Kaur, who is our Executive Director of Talent Strategy. And with her is Shannon Black on her left, who is our Director for Performance Management. So what I'm going to tell you is basically what we're going to tell you about this evening as succinctly as we possibly can. We really want to go into a little bit on team evaluation, and let's go back to our earlier conversation. We absolutely know that most of our teachers are those outstanding teachers, and we truly have thought about how do we recognize that. But then there's always that part where we have to winnow out to make sure that we have 100% great teachers. So even though tonight's discussion is going to be on that small portion, we want to recognize that most of our teachers are really outstanding. So we're going to review how team happens, how you get to be a team evaluator, what does that mean, what is the entire process. It is not a one-time event. I want to make sure that everybody understands that. It's a continuous process. And then we want to talk to you about what happens when it comes to that point that we have to make that decision that this person is really not up to the standard that we need to have in front of our children every day. So we'll also work through that due process. So I want to give you a little context and give you some direction, and then I'm going to turn it over to the experts to go through that process with you. So Katie.
Okay, thank you. So we really want to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes or so talking about the evaluation, longer if you prefer. And we want it to be an honest discourse between you, the board members, and us. We want your questions. We want to answer you as honestly and transparently as possible. We know that there are a lot of questions about the evaluation, and we have many thoughts on how it's been implemented to date and where we're going in the future to improve implementation. But we really are looking for the probing questions from you. So think of this part as a true work session in the sense of interrupt us, question us, and challenge us so we can move forward together. We just wanted to start with a little bit of the research and why we are talking about evaluation so much in the last couple of years. You all know that the dialogue around evaluation has changed dramatically in the last 3-4 years. We know that our previous systems of evaluation, as you do too, provided no differentiation between teachers. 99% of all teachers were rated satisfactory. We also know that through various studies, it's evident that multiple measures of teacher effectiveness are really the best way to evaluate the quality of a teacher, so we really need to be looking at a variety of things, the observation of a teacher in practice, but also student scores on assessments and student growth. We also know now that there are specific behaviors that we can identify that teachers are exhibiting when they are performing at high levels. There are specific indicators that we can be looking for when we're observing teachers in practice, and we can now point to those. We actually didn't know that information previously. We also know that value-added scores are predictive. We can have a whole another work session on value-added. And we also know, we've talked to many of our teachers in our district, teachers want feedback. I mean, they're not looking, they don't want to be in a punitive environment where everything feels negative. That's obviously not what we're trying to create, but they definitely are seeking and want feedback on their performance, just as we all do up here. Most important, though, is that this is a work in progress. This is not a perfect tool, the team appraisal system. It is not a final tool. It's going to be changed. It's going to evolve every year. We've already implemented changes that the state has made from the first year of implementation, and we will continue to do so. It really is a work in progress, and we are looking to get better at evaluating our teacher quality. But we're not perfect yet. Okay, I'm going to turn it over. Shannon leads all of our efforts for the team evaluation, and I'm going to turn it over to her. She's going to provide just a high-level overview of how the evaluation system works. We know that you've had this to some degree before, but this is a chance to kind of get a little bit deeper and answer some questions.
Good evening. My hopes are I could do this sitting down. I'm a teacher and want to be up. And so let's look at first tested teachers and subjects. Those are teachers that get individual teacher effect data, right? So the weighting is different from those teachers that are tested and those teachers that are non-tested. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking tested teachers. So the first portion of that is the 50%, and that's based off of observations. There are 3 rubrics. There's a general educator rubric, a school services personnel rubric, which would include instructional coaches, school counselors, school psychologists, social workers, district level coaches. Then we also have the library of media specialist. So there are 3 different rubrics, but they all hit the instructional domain, the planning domain, and then an environment piece. And then everybody gets a professionalism at the end of the year. So that's the 50% for the tested teacher. Questions? Okay. Then we move on to teachers in the tested subject areas. That 35% is the growth piece. And that's individual teacher effect data for their own students that they've taught. But that could include up to 3 years of data. So if I have been an Algebra 1 teacher for 3 years, that 35% would include 3 years of Algebra 1 data for the teachers and the students I've taught over the past 3 years. So that's just not necessarily a one data point. It could be 3 years of data. If it's a 2-year teacher, 2-year 4th grade teacher, she would have 2 years of data. So that's the 35%. Questions about the 35%? Okay. Then there's a 15% achievement measure. And there are options for the teachers, different measures to select. Currently, we have DIBELS, ELDA, graduation rate, CTE completer at the high school level. TVOS is another option. TCAP is an option. And that's a conversation between the principal and the teacher. Should be both closely aligned to their job, right, and the work that they do. And that's kind of signed off and agreed upon. And so all of that weighting would equal their overall level of effectiveness for a tested teacher. Questions? Sure.
And these...
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. I've got a list of probably 15 to 20, and this is not an all-inclusive list. Is that right? There are others besides the ones that are stated on the state assessment.
50%.
So in terms of the 15%, what you see possibly on the team website, the DOE, those are recommendations of measures. The district actually has the ability to really hone in on a selection of the 15% measure. So it's really district discretion. The state provides guidance on what those options potentially could be, and then we as a district decide what 15% measure options we will do.
Okay, so even though the state says this is not all-inclusive, Metro then has...
Yes, district discretion,
Okay,
correct.
and does do all of the variations that are listed on the state website, are those also part of the Metro?
So variations, let me see if this would address your question.
Okay.
For example, TCAP is a 15% achievement measure. It could be grade level TCAP, school level TCAP, or individual. So there's a variance within the TCAP selection. So for example, it's a 5th grade teacher works very collaboratively with the 5th grade team. She might discuss with her principal and choose TCAP grade level. That would be a conversation and agreed upon. Does that address your question?
Well, let me ask a specific question.
Sure.
Fontes and Pinnell is mentioned.
We don't use that.
You don't use Fontes and Pinnell, okay. Even though we're ordering them this year.
That could be a potential. So right now, the discussion is moving forward what 15% measures, and we've begun to have those conversations, talking to principals, teachers, district staff about what 15% measure options we would like to use moving forward.
Is text level reading assessments?
No. The running record is
Yes.
not correct.
Yes. Is that something that we're also considering?
No, not to my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? So then there's non-tested teachers. And this just changed in May. So when you go to non-tested teachers, these are teachers, large majority of our teachers, they don't have the individual teacher effect data. Oh, let me say something about tested. I'm sorry. I apologize. We have, starting this school year, the 2013-14 school year, our fine arts teachers will now be tested teachers. They are going to engage in a portfolio model which will generate their own individual teacher effect data. So it's our music, band, orchestra, choral, art teachers, and they'll have a portfolio. They will gather their portfolio evidence documentation. They'll load it into a database. It will be blind scored by other fine arts educators from across the state, and it will calculate an individual teacher effect. So they will now become tested teachers this school year. So that's coming. In an effort to get more of our teachers tested and having their own students' data attached to their evaluation. Sorry, non-tested, 60% is observation data, that's non-tested teachers. That's also instructional coaches, guidance counselors. 25, go ahead, yeah.
For the 60%. Hold on. Remember, your mics are not on, so before you start asking a question, get my attention. You're on.
For the 60% non-tested, do we have alignment between the people that are observing, right? So let's say you've got does a math teacher observe a math, or someone with math specialty observe a math person, or somebody, do the observers know how to really observe? Do they have skill to observe?
So we'll get there into that piece and kind of our support. But yes, currently evaluators in buildings are principals, assistant principals, and then get support from the district, from leadership and learning, who have persons that are also trained team observers. His prior subject area coordinators were also evaluating as well.
Would that also roll into school psychologists, special ed teachers?
Yes.
Speech language
Deb McAdams,
pathologists?
exceptional ed, they have a team from the district level, EL teachers as well, that EL staff that do the EL people as well.
So EL, how about speech or?
Yes.
So a speech therapist would review a speech therapist,
Yes.
or a psychologist, a psychologist.
Deb has a whole team in her office that evaluates exceptional education staff, correct. 25% is growth measure, and those are school-wide measures for non-tested teachers. Should be most closely aligned to their job description. 15% is the same as we just spoke about. It's an option for the teacher. It's a conversation between the teacher and the principal, and that's non-tested. Questions there? Okay. Then moving on to the number of observations. And so if you can see here, the two licensure statuses would be the apprentice, and if you kind of move over, if you are a overall meaning combined, you're at 15% achievement, your growth measure, and your observations. If you're a 1 in all three of those components, or if you have a 1 on your individual teacher effect data, or you're a 2, 3, or 4 as an apprentice, you get 2 announced and 2 unannounced. So half are announced, you know that the principal is coming in, you sit down, you have a pre-conference, you discuss the lesson prior to, they come in and observe, then you sit down and have a post-conference. Then there would be 2 unannounced where the principal, the assistant principal, whomever is evaluating comes in, observes the lesson, and then sits down and has a post-conference after that. If you're an apprentice teacher and you're a level 5, that's individual teacher effect level 5, or an overall level 5, you have 1 announced on all 3 of the domains, and then in the second semester you have just 2 walkthroughs where the evaluator provides feedback. Questions? Jill? Oh, go ahead.
Are we in comments or are we just questions? Because I was at a comment,
Okay,
I guess.
both.
Okay, so if we're looking at, I'm going back to the last slide, but if we're looking at teachers who do not have data from their classrooms, what we are saying is that 85% of their evaluation will be based on the observation by one person in their classroom, right?
Okay.
And, well, go ahead, finish.
Okay. So when you say we,
Yeah.
may I ask who you mean by we? We as Metro, or
Yeah,
we as
well,
the
this
state?
is discussion.
So
What
yeah,
my
this
understanding is, I should say,
Okay.
so it'll be observations by one person.
That could or could not be the case. For
Okay.
example, in many of our elementary schools, we have no assistant principals. And so it would be one person. But in our
Okay.
middle schools, we have assistant principals and principals. And in high schools, we have the same scenario. Now, there's kind of autonomy on who does the evaluation, kind of how they do it school by school, but to make the assumption that it's just one person, it could be more than one person. Correct, could be district.
Well, but it's the observation, and then it's school-wide data. And I'm saying this because I think it's really easy to, I'm not here to throw stones, because I really think it is easy to criticize and harder to come up with good solutions. And I think, but my concern is I think that if we can fix the standardized testing and the teacher evaluations so that teachers feel that they are being evaluated fairly based on factors that they can control, I think we've gone a long way to making improvements in the school. So that's my concern, is that the flaw in this model seems to me that it's if we have 60% or more of our teachers that don't have classroom data, right, and they are their evaluations are based on, one person observation plus school-wide data that
Potentially one person observation.
Potentially, I'm sorry, I should say, in some cases. And then school-wide data, to me, that's just it's very problematic for a lot of reasons. And one concern that I have is, are we going to be discouraging teachers from going into those more challenging schools because they're not going to, anyway, I'm rambling, that's a lot of points, but.
No, I think really good points and things that we have debated and discussed to this date. In terms of the multiple observation, the multiple observers, we would love to have multiple observers for every single teacher. That is clearly the best way to evaluate all performance. It's a capacity issue at this point. We'll unveil in just a little bit what we're doing in certain cases and how we're going to be moving forward with multiple observers for specific cases. Down the line, we would love to see it for every teacher, so we completely agree with you, and research shows it's best practice. In terms of the pool, it is quite a large percentage of teachers, roughly 68 or so, I think, percent of our district that does not have individual tested data for themselves. So the state recognized that. That's why they bumped the observation to 60% of the entire appraisal as opposed to 50. That's new for this year. But again, like we said, it's definitely a work in progress and not perfect yet.
And the weighting is a state determines the weighting. That's not district discretion. And I just want to clarify that because many conversations are we, and it's not necessarily we as the district. It again is something that's kind of, these are how you will do the evaluation. So we, Metro Nashville Schools, we don't determine the weighting formula for the teachers, tested and non-tested.
Can I go a little broader, one more question? Do you think this is the best model that we could use?
So I've debated this exact issue many, many times with lots of different people, and I've looked at all sorts of evaluation models. In my previous job, this was one of my major focuses, was to look at evaluation appraisal instruments deeply. I have come to the conclusion that it's not the instrument itself that is problematic. I actually think the TAP rubric that we use is one of the best rubrics to evaluate teacher quality out there. Hands down, I think it's really, really strong. I think it's the implementation and the inter-rater reliability that can get any district into trouble. And so that's what we need to be focused on. I don't think the appraisal instrument itself is the problem here. I do think that there are issues with non-tested subjects and grades. There obviously, are concerns. There's no solution out there yet that I've seen that's better than what we're doing, but this isn't, like I said, this is not perfect.
And the NIT TAP rubric that we use is rooted in the work of Charlotte Danielson, and she has she's nationally known for her work in teacher evaluation in many, many states. New York, California, and others are using her teaching framework. So our rubric models that teaching rubric that others across the nation are using as well.
Two questions.
Ms. Berry. A question about the unannounced visits. Did I understand you to say that there is no pre-observation conference for an unannounced
No
visit?
pre-conference.
Why
for
is that?
It's just sheerly unannounced, half are, half aren't.
I understand, but even, when I was a state evaluator, and we did, surprise visits, but we always had a pre-observation conference, so we could see what, to go into a classroom blind and to not have a pre-observation conference is problematic in my opinion.
And then, too, and just as something that Dr. Register spoke about in kind of developing the teacher talent, if we think solely that team evaluation is going to improve teaching, then we are kidding ourselves, because it's the work that we do every day and the feedback that we give teachers every single day, because when we do the evaluation, that's scored, right? And so the feedback that you give them, you're asking them to change practice based off of something they did in the past, you're talking about it in the present, and you expect them to make a future change. So unless you're providing additional feedback and support all along the way, we can't just rely on the team rubric. So there are other opportunities for principals to have discussions with teachers about their practice other than the announced, the unannounced, pre, post.
And just to add to that, and to add to what Amy has brought up, I can't imagine that any principal, especially at the high school level, would have the expertise to evaluate French and Spanish and math. And if that would be some principal that would have the expertise in all those areas.
Yeah, this is again something that comes up, should the rubric be subject specific? It's not. Our rubric is teaching quality across the board, and one reason why I really like this rubric more than others that I've seen is because it really does focus on what the student is doing in the classroom. And so the observer is looking at, is the student engaged? Is the student being probed for high-level questions? Is the student, excited about the work, motivated to do well? Those are the things that the rubric is trying to identify. So it should be subject neutral. We hear your point, and there are other models out there that are rubric specific, to each subject. We're just not doing that.
And in all the indicators on the instruction, there's only one, and it's professional content knowledge that specifically speaks to the content.
Dr. Gentry.
So I think if I were to kind of hone in on where I sense the challenge being in the whole teacher evaluation process is what you just mentioned, is what happens between observations. And so, when we get into these, and when I get into these conversations in the community about how our teachers need to be paid more, obviously they do, how their professionals need to be treated, so this is what you find in corporate America. in professional ed. You get evaluated. There are blind observations in corporate America. They just they aren't as uncomfortable because you're not in a classroom and then someone pops in. You're at work and someone is watching you every day do what you do. So I'm not put off or challenged at all by the concept of the evaluation. And I think the challenge, whether it's in the classroom, a school system, or corporate, is providing the feedback. Because if we were to fast forward to what this is really is a prelude to, this entire teacher dismissal process, if we are going to continue to be a part of that, my bigger interest is in what was the engagement. And so I'd like to hear you talk about that. How has that been formalized? What do you expect to see from a principal or from a teacher as far as documentation of the results of that observation, how those expectations of changes in behavior have been communicated to the teacher? Is there a sign-off? Are we in agreement on what the changes in behavior need to be? We call it a work improvement plan at where I work. I don't know what we call it here in the school system. So I'd like to hear more about that engagement. So how do we get to the change in behavior?
So we're going to jump around a little bit to address that particular issue. So we have some slides that we'll show you in a few minutes, but let's talk specifically about what we're doing to ensure that our principals have what they need to be able to provide that high quality feedback, but also to be able to observe with fidelity across classrooms. Some of the work that we've done to date, we've contracted out with somebody from TAP, from NIET, which is the organization that has written the rubric that we use for our observations. We contracted with someone from their organization to come in and do some extensive training with our principals around inter-rater reliability, around what to look for in observations. Yes, so I was asked to explain inter-rater reliability. Simply means that if Kathy and I are observing a teacher, that we both score the teacher in the same areas with the same level of integrity, because it's totally objective, right? Yeah, it's an objective rubric as opposed to us putting our own personal take on it. And so you want to look for as much inter-rater reliability as possible among principals, so everybody, or among any observer, so that everybody is observing the same level of quality.
And principals or those that are evaluating each year have to take a certification test. And a portion of that certification test is watching an online video of a teacher and the students. It's about an hour long, and then they have to rate. And in order to pass, you have to have inter-rater reliability with a national score. That's the first part. Then the second part of the certification test is a series of questions about the pre and post conference. That has to be done yearly, and you must be team certified to evaluate a teacher. So that's one of the things that we do too in terms of supporting the principal work.
And I just jumped back up to this slide, which is the state requirements around principal or observer quality. In terms of what we do, so I was mentioning our deep dive with the TAP consultant that had been extremely we had a lot of good response from our principals around that work. We also have spent the last 3 years focused on Skillful Classroom and Observation Laboratory, which is based on Mike Rutherford's work around the artisan teacher. And really, this work is some of the best I've ever seen in terms of coaching principals on how to have those conversations, both around the things that a teacher needs to work on, but also around recognizing teachers. We were talking about it earlier, complimenting them, rewarding them for doing things extraordinary in the classroom. That work has been incredibly helpful in our district to really get to those conversations and get at what Ms. Gentry was addressing. The Succeed training is done through the McGrath work, and that is all of our principals are required to go through Succeed training, and basically it is the way to have those really difficult conversations around poor performance with teachers, and that again has been lauded by both our teachers and our principals as really beneficial in terms of those awkward conversations that we know are difficult to have. We're unveiling this year some very specific standard operating procedures, which will also be a work in progress given that the evaluation itself changes, but that will also help our principals and our teachers all understand exactly how we are rolling out the evaluation in our district. It's been rolled out in years past in very, very broad ways, and I think this will get much more specific and more helpful for principals. We're also adopting a new we've purchased a new application from Tower that will help principals upload and track data in real time for their observations. It will also hopefully be able to flag some irregularities or flag some specific really negative score, like really low scores on the observation, and so we can track that as well at the district level. So it'll just be another way for us to in real time track data of our evaluations. And then we've also clarified the grievance process for teachers so that they really feel like they understand. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting there, so they really understand what they need to do if they feel like there has been something that they're concerned about in terms of the implementation of the evaluation system.
And I think Mr. Pinkston had. Does that answer your question, Dr. Dentrow? Or did you have follow-up?
It didn't, but that's okay. I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
No, keep going.
I guess I'm not clear on, of all of those things, and maybe you said it and I missed it. So if we slow down a little bit and just answer, so the principal observes the teacher, documents some expected changes in behavior. I'm sure that's not all they're documenting, but in there somewhere is some expected changes in behavior. There's a conversation with the teacher. Does the teacher sign off and agree on what those changes of behavior need to be? And is there evidence documented? So this is what I've observed. These are the changes in behavior I expect, which will be evidenced by.
So I think what you're getting at is plans of assistance that we use for not all teachers. Are you looking for poor performance or just any? No, any developmental plan.
Well, I mean, it's the poor performance that gets us to the last bullet there. So, in particular, I suppose, yes. So, how do we get to the point where we need to have a parting of the ways? And the only way I think that everyone can be comfortable with that is if everyone is on the same page about what needs to be done to avoid that.
So we do have, in terms of our poor performers, we have what's called a plan of assistance, and it is an agreed upon document that the principal shares with the teacher that lays out benchmarks and expectations and areas of needed growth. And at the end of that conference, to the discussion of the plan of assistance, the teacher does sign off that she or he has received the plan of assistance and is aware of the contents of the plan. If at the end of the set timeline that is part of the plan of assistance, if that teacher has not met those goals, then the principal may choose to move towards dismissal. Or move towards another, reprimand of some kind. But that's for our poor performers. Do you want to talk about like the areas of refinement?
The team portion of it does have an area of reinforcement. You do well with this, and an area of refinement, conversation around what could really make a difference in your teaching and kind of give some feedback around that. That is a document that's signed upon by both the principal and the teacher, as well as a feedback piece. And I also think in terms of your thoughts around feedback, it's not just a principal giving the teacher feedback. It's a lot of times teachers knowing how to give good feedback to teachers. And I do know that there are a lot of principals that are beginning to expand those conversations and that kind of work within schools, within their PLCs, really promoting using the team rubric, because team rubric is a standard of teaching. It is the standard of quality teaching in Metro Nashville schools. And to get them to be able to have common language and begin to talk to each other in PLCs and give each other feedback of teaching. And I know that there's a middle school principal who's building in time that teachers can go observe teachers and provide each other feedback. And I think that that's just as helpful, in my personal opinion, as anything else, as teachers giving teachers feedback about the work they do every day.
Do you want to have a follow-up? I don't know if we've answered what you needed.
We're good. Mr. Pinkston, and then I have a question.
Thank you. Can we go back to the pie chart that showed the skeletal breakdown of the framework? So I want to just first acknowledge I'm not an impartial observer in this. I was involved in various stages of development about this team framework over the past few years. With respect to the classroom observations, having a 50+% weight on that does not really trouble me. As Dr. Gentry said, this is the way that most organizations in America operate these days. There's a certain amount of subjectivity in evaluations, and in many organizations it's 100% subjective. So at least we do have a framework where there is objective student achievement data being brought to bear. What does concern me is, and what was frankly not intended in the original discussions at the state level around this framework, is having such a heavy weight based on school-wide value-added data for teachers and non-tested grades and subjects. I know it's a tricky question, and there's no easy answer here. And cut into the chase, acknowledging that we are the largest district in the state administering the team evaluation. Memphis is, or whatever the school system is called these days, Memphis Shelby County, they're acknowledging that they are in whole or part operating under a different system. We are the largest team district in the state. And my question is, what obligation do we have to inform, as much as the state is willing to take advice from us on what the future could look like around alternatives to that 25%. It just feels too high. If it were more like 5 or 10%, as kind of an incentive, to get people to work together in the building, that's one thing, but having a quarter of your evaluation based on stuff that you have no control over seems frankly unfair to me. And I know that everybody's still grappling with it. I'd just like to hear any thinking on it about what our role could be in informing the continued refinement and development of the system.
Well, the state is definitely taking this very seriously, and they're definitely looking at each component and analyzing it and wondering how should it change. They're getting feedback from us and from others. They've been very receptive to the feedback that Shannon and I and others in our district have given them. They also are making changes. We obviously saw that with the 60%. They're rolling out the fine arts portfolio option to test fine arts teachers, so that they're listening. Is there the problem is not that they're not listening, and the problem is that there aren't great solutions out there right now. So we have, the example of Delaware that, created 67 different assessments for the 67 different areas so that all teachers had tested data. We have student learning objectives, which have been implemented, another option for non-tested teachers, which have been implemented with large variation across the country. And have not been really tightened up yet. So there hasn't been another option yet available that covers this. In terms of reducing it like DC does, they have maybe 15% or something is school-wide, or 10% even, and 90% is the observation. Those conversations we have had with the state, and I think that the reflection of the 60% is moving in that direction. I don't know what they'll end up doing. I do want to add that even though we are the largest state using the team observation, all districts in the state are held to the exact same ratios, and so all districts must use a 35% growth measure, and the majority of those districts are using school-wide value added as well.
Thank you. And I just, I want to clarify, I know that there are no easy answers around, or solutions around the school-wide value added. And I do think that Sarah Haber and her team at the state do a good job, very good job administering what they've got. But as much as we could encourage continued refinement in our role as the largest district, I think that would be a great thing.
Totally agree.
And I think one of the very important to me is that we also be very transparent with the teachers and really give them opportunities to ask questions and engage and really understand the evaluation system as well.
I have a question. Were you finished?
No, go ahead.
My question is, we're going to flip back and forth here. You open the door. Here we go.
Flip it, yes.
We were talking about feedback just a second ago, and Shannon, you mentioned feedback from teachers and principals. Is all of that a part of the teacher's overall evaluation? if they receive feedback from coworkers, teachers, if they receive feedback from principals, is all of that or any of it or what portion of it part of the overall evaluation tool?
No. If they give you an area of refinement, the hopes is that it will improve the next, but that doesn't, if you don't, it would be reflected in the indicators observed. It wouldn't be an extra strike, if you will. So for example, if it's motivating students where the area of refinement, and you discussed and talked about what potentially could improve or change, and then the next time you observed and scored, it would just be the score in the rubric again, the motivating student piece. So it could improve, it might not improve, but it would just be scored there.
So during the observation piece, let's say we've got a teacher, a principal is observing the classroom, and we've got a teacher there who's providing feedback to another teacher. How is that read into the teacher's overall performance?
Not. So in terms of teacher to teacher, all of that would be informal feedback. So I think of the team evaluation that's scored, and so I have a child in school, and so I think of it as a report card grade, and it's not going to change. So if I get scored on the team observation, that's a snapshot in time, right? That's like the TCAP, that's scored. So that's not going to change until the next time the evaluator comes. So in terms of that informal, whether it's teacher to teacher, evaluate, or principal to teacher, those things are informal. They don't factor into the team evaluation.
Okay, and then pardon me for sounding so crass, but why do it? If I'm a teacher and it's not going to make a difference whatsoever, why am I being saddled with another teacher coming into my classroom? I understand where you're going with this, but if it's not going to be part of the overall evaluation, if it's not going to be a part of, if it's not going to be beneficial, why do it?
Right, so in terms, I think that speaks to climate, culture, and community and buildings. I also think it speaks of growth mindsets in people, that they want to do better and they want to make a change. So it's just part of improving practice is getting feedback. That's continuous improvement. That's just the cycle. It's getting feedback. It's making a change in hopes that your practice would improve. But some of those teacher-to-teacher things that are happening in some of the schools, they want that. It's not something that's imposed on them. It's something that they are wanting to do. They are wanting to collaborate more and work together. Those aren't decisions made by the principal. We will do this. It's something we're doing together to improve practice and learning for our students.
And I think it's great that the teachers are willing to do that. I think it's fantastic. I think it does promote excellent down the road behavior for teachers. And again, I don't want it to sound like I'm being crass or ugly, but I go back to what Dr. Gentry said earlier. There are a lot of things that happen in corporate America that don't necessarily happen at the educational institute level. And if a colleague provides feedback or if a manager provides feedback, the expectation is going to be that you're going to listen to that and do something with it. It's just kind of curious because there's no measurement. So is it really beneficial to the teachers? No, it is, but is it really beneficial for them not to have some sort of documentation?
Well, in terms of the feedback, it would depend on the teacher, right? New teacher, been a seasoned teacher, highly effective teacher, teacher that's needing improvement in one area. There are different ways that you have different types of conversations with teachers. So in terms of what we're talking about, if I am a teacher telling you should try this, that's really calibrating, or that's really consulting. Or if it's two really highly effective teachers together, it's a collaborative conversation. Hey, I tried this, did it work? So I think that there are different stances and different ways and slants that you go at it depending upon the teacher and the situation. So I don't think it necessarily has to be documented. If I'm highly effective and Katie's highly effective, just that collaborative conversation and her giving me feedback is going to improve my practice, and I don't necessarily think that always has to be documented.
Okay. And one last thing, and I'll let you move on with this. If you've got a teacher who is highly effective and that teacher is coaching a new teacher, first, second-year teacher, would it be beneficial? Well, let me ask you this, because this actually may be happening. Does the principal go to that teacher just for, even if it's not a part of the evaluation process, just for feedback on how that relationship is going. And the reason I ask this is because I think that if you've got an expert teacher and they see a first-year teacher struggling, I think it'll be fantastic for that teacher to walk in there and give some guidance. Now, what happens if that new teacher doesn't accept that and we still see a path, a downward path? So are the principals right now looking for that feedback, again, regardless of whether it's part of the evaluation?
Instructional
Dottie, you want to
coaches.
speak to that? Yeah.
That's what instructional coaches do.
Absolutely. It's everybody.
As a principal, we were given many opportunities to learn ways to help teachers, and one of the greatest ones was with Mike Rutherford. He's got this toolkit that he's taught us about, and it's about how to give feedback to teachers. 30 seconds, 5 minutes, but it's engaging that teacher in that conversation. And that's to be done informally. That doesn't have a document that goes with it. It is that conversation you have when you've dropped in and you've watched a teacher for a few minutes, and afterwards you catch them in the hall or you see them before after school, and you give them feedback on that lesson. And it can be short, it's not formalized, it's just good, honest feedback to help them. And also to tell them they're doing a great job.
So the principal does go to a teacher and say, what did you think about that? Okay.
One of the big pieces, too, that I don't think we've talked about is after a teacher's been observed formally, they get to evaluate themselves. There's a self-assessment piece on there. And they turn that into the principal before, at least I always ask for it before I had the evaluation, the post-conference with them. They self-evaluate themselves, and then on the back, they have a chance to reflect on their performance. And that's one of the most powerful pieces, because a teacher can usually be harder on themselves than an administrator would be. And as an administrator, when I got to read their self-reflection, it helped me understand how to approach them about what I wanted to talk about for a refinement. So that's a really important piece, is that self-reflection. And there's another piece too, a professional rubric goes along with this, and we don't talk about it a whole lot. But the first component on the professional rubric, the teachers can actually, there's a part that asks them to go and seek feedback from their evaluators and their peers. And so they can get scored on that if they do that. So those are some pieces that are really valuable, and they help the teacher be a very important part of this evaluation process.
Thank you. We've successfully turned this 20-minute presentation into about 35 minutes. Any other questions? Okay, Dr. Gentry, Ms. Shepherd.
So, I mentioned my day job a lot, and not that we've got this down to a science by any stretch of the imagination. So, in the spirit of full transparency, and I joke a lot about my evaluations that I get at work, but they're interesting. They've changed. I've been with HCA nearly 17 years, and then probably every 2 or 3 years it's a different tool, a different rubric, a different way of coming up with what the goals are. Start off just based on your job description, and now it's actually specific and focused on what we expect you to produce. So I see that this is where what we're doing here is trending. And so I guess just to reiterate that it is a process that has grown over time and will continue to grow. And it's a cyclical thing, and we will look at how it comes out, and we'll go back and refine the process. And no one's saying that this is what we're going to do and it's never ever going to change. What I would like to hear is what are we doing to get to a culture in our schools that really supports that? Because you tolerate manager feedback, you have to grow to accept peer feedback. And I know we've done a lot. So, you don't have to go back to, for years we've been getting to this point. We've done a lot of other things that we haven't really talked a lot about here, but one of the things I like to say all the time, let's not forget all the other pieces that have been put in place. The data coaches, the team teaching, the lead teachers, the instructional coaches. We've done a lot that is creating a foundation to make this possible. So the feedback from a teacher didn't start with this. It actually started 3, 4, 5, I've been here 5 years, 5 years ago with some of the other things that we've done. So this isn't what started teacher feedback and principals talking to other teachers about how teachers within the building are performing. So if you could just kind of, I know it's a lot, but kind of briefly step back and talk about the bigger thing, because this is really just now a tool that we can put all these inputs in that we've created from years ago, right?
That's absolutely correct. It's building a collaborative culture, and we've not been collaborative. Teachers typically have worked in isolation. Go in the classroom, shut the door, do your work in isolation, and not really interact with other people. So a lot of what we've done has been structural. And if you think about the way we've organized our high schools and academies and small learning communities, small groups of teachers who have common planning times, teachers, math departments in middle schools who have common planning times or grade level teams. And we really push and promote building that collaboration. Shared looks at student work, looking at how my students do compared to your students in 7th grade math, looking at how my reading students do in 3rd grade compared to yours, or developing best practice as a team to do that is really the bigger picture that I'm concerned with. I think the key to success is building that collaborative culture and getting professionals working together to accomplish that, to accomplish success for students. And I think that just, and a lot of what we've done, we've talked about the Rutherford training a good bit. You've invested quite a bit in that over the last 3 years. And it's the best training that you can get to help principals learn how to be good observers of instruction and good coaches. And our coaching model does that too. So it's really what we've been about across the district. And I think, and the result of that is, I think our principals are better prepared than any others in this state to do it.
Ms. Shepherd, I have a question.
I did. You mentioned on the actual evaluation a couple of areas where if an observer had a recommendation or, can you touch back on that again?
Sure. There's an area of reinforcement, and that, I think it might have, is that on? Yeah. There's an area of reinforcement, so it's based off of the evidence of the lesson that was observed. There's an indicator, and they did have a discussion about what went well in the lesson based off of the evidence. And then there's an area of refinement, which would be another indicator on which potentially would make a great difference to the instruction of the lesson. And again, it's one of those scored indicators, and there's a conversation around that as well.
Thank you.
If no other objections, can we get through this before we ask any additional questions? Sure. Thank you. So let's take a look at Metro Nashville Public Schools and what happened in our district in 2011-12. We are currently getting the results back from the state right now for our 2012-13 team implementation. But in terms of the observation, which is again 50% of the total for both tested and non-tested during this school year, we clearly skewed high on the observation. And the reason why I wanted to show this to you is that very, very few teachers in our district received a 1 on their observation scores across all their areas. That's only 22 of our 6,029 teachers who received a 1 in observation. So we are skewing high. That's not necessarily good or bad. We need to make sure that that inter-rater reliability is there. But I just want to reflect on that for a second, because there sometimes is a rumor or an idea out there that our observations are really critical, when in fact the data show differently. This is the correlation between TVOS individual teacher effect scores and observations. Again, you can see the skewing high in relationship. You see the 20.2% down there who received a 1 on their individual TVOS score, but yet only 0.4% received a 1. And this is all the only teachers who are tested subjects received a 1 in terms of observation. So again, skewing high on observation. In terms of the full composite, so this is not just looking at the observation, this is the entire composite. We had 195 of our 6,029 teachers who received a 1 on the composite. Of those 195 teachers, there are 63 who are still in the district. The majority of them obviously have resigned or moved on to other areas.
Of those 63, we actually are taking a look and seeing what their performance has been in the district this year. We'll look at the team composite scores this year and really determine on a case-by-case basis what needs to happen to either support them or to move them out of the district. In terms of making sure that we have an element of accountability, an element of oversight at the central office level for implementation, we are, in terms of moving forward, going to develop a professional learning community, a PLC, that is a group of trained colleagues from central office. That's the executive lead principals, those principal managers, the 6 principal managers who report to Dr. Steele. We have HC liaisons in our division who are trained certified observers of the team evaluation. We have evaluation staff, and then those lead principals, those master principals that Dr. Steele was talking about earlier. That group of people we're going to have meet on a regular basis to stay well informed with what's going on with evaluation nationally and at the state level, and then also serve as an external review to our building principals when needed. So we have they're going to be, the oversight for the district in terms of the implementation. They're going to collectively train all the principals on implementation. They'll provide extensive support for specific principals who are struggling either because of discrepancies between their observations or new principals who may not be as familiar with our rubric. And then they'll also serve as an external observer for principals in 2 situations. One is when a teacher has had a team composite of a 1 in the previous year. We'll bring in one of these external observers to Ms. Froeg's point earlier to serve as an external observer for that teacher. And then also when a teacher receives an observation at the beginning of the school year in the fall semester that is less than a 2. On the rubric, will automatically trigger an external observation as well. So just ways, it's again not perfect, but just ways to kind of get around some of the concern around subjectivity that we have heard from the board. Okay, now we're moving on. Any other questions about that before we move into the dismissal work?
No, I think we've sobered enough.
I apologize.
No, I'm just joking.
So I'm going to turn it to Kathy Sandback, who is our lead attorney with Metro Legal.
Hi, everyone. I'll try to make this brief, but I also want to take the time to answer any questions that you all have about the process. As you know, I serve as attorney for both the Metropolitan Nashville Public Schools Administration as well as you all, the Metropolitan Board of Public Education. And so my role is to ensure legal integrity in the dismissal process and also to make sure that everyone understands their role in the process. There are roles for both the Director of Schools, the MNPS administration, as well as for the board. And it's not exactly clear in the statutory scheme, but I've researched it and wanted to talk to you all about how it works and also answer any questions that you have. So the process for dismissing a teacher, if you could click it, thank you. To give you a little bit of history, in the past, the Board of Education had a very large role in teacher dismissal hearings. I don't know if any of you all were around back when the board used to hear these cases and hear witnesses, but there always has been a 3-part process. It's always been the certification of charges, where charges are brought against a teacher by the Director of Schools, and then the board has heard, or somebody has heard evidence and had a full impartial hearing on the case, and then it's always gone back to the board to determine, make the final decision about whether a teacher should be dismissed or not. But it's evolved the way that plays out, and so in the past, the board would first certify the charges. When the director would bring the charges, the board would look at the charges and say, on the face of these charges, if everything is proven to be true, is this sufficient to warrant dismissal? And then if so, the charges are certified, notice is provided to the teacher, and then the teacher could request a hearing. That hearing would be done, completely conducted by the board in the past. So the board would sit until sometimes 2, 3 in the morning on each of these hearings, and would hear all of the evidence. There would be an attorney on both sides, or the teacher might also represent themselves. But the board would hear from all the witnesses, look at all the exhibits, and then make the ruling about whether the teacher should be dismissed or not. That has now been changed statutorily to provide for that hearing to be conducted by an impartial hearing officer. And so the way it works now, it's still the same three-part process. The certification of charges, then the full informal hearing where all the evidence is heard, and then the board makes the final decision. But now the hearing is done by someone else, so you all don't have to sit here till 3 in the morning listening to evidence.
Thank you.
Yes, I think that's very much appreciated. But the important, it's changed to the current process, and now the director of schools initiates dismissal proceedings before the board, but then it goes on to the hearing officer. But the director of schools, as you all know, has the primary responsibility for all personnel decisions. And in the cases of all other employees in the school system, the director of schools does not bring it before you all to hear it. He just dismisses employees at will. However, with tenured teachers, there's a special statutory provision that you all know about that provides for this hearing process that is a much more intensive and detail-heavy process for dismissing tenured teachers from employment. And it does really involve you all. In fact, you're the ultimate decision makers, and the only appeal from you is to the Chancery Court. And so you all actually make the ultimate decision on teacher termination under the current scheme. So it's important for you all to understand how that process gets to you. So there are 5 bases in the statute that allow the director to recommend termination. Those are incompetence, inefficiency, neglect of duty, unprofessional conduct, unbecoming a member of the teaching profession, and insubordination. And those are the only bases that allow the director of schools to bring charges and to you for certification. The incompetence, and there are statutory definitions, which I'm going to give you all copies of the statutes and for further reading homework that have all the statutory definitions of these. But you will rarely see incompetence on a notice of charges because of the statutory definition of incompetence is very strange, and it basically says the teacher is unable to do their job because of some physical or mental condition. I can't imagine that we would bring many charges on that basis. It is always a possibility, but it's a very strange creature in the statute. More likely you're to see inefficiency as a basis for termination. And inefficiency has a catch-all in the statute, which is wanting ineffective performance of duties. And so basically inefficiency is any time a teacher is not meeting the expectations in their duties, and that could be anything from performance to doing paperwork, they're not submitting grades, they're, anything that falls below the expectations of the administration pretty much falls under inefficiency. Neglect of duty is when a teacher has left after they've run out of their leave, all FMLA leave, which is 12 weeks a year, that you're given for serious health conditions. They've run out of sick leave. They've run out of all leave, and they still continue to not come to work after being told that they will be absent without leave if they don't come to work. And that has not been traditionally brought as charges, but there is a review going on of the leave policies with the school system, and so you may possibly see some neglect of duty cases come before you, but that would be basically someone who continues to not come to work when they're not granted any leave. Unprofessional conduct unbecoming to a member of the teaching profession is anything that is conduct-based. So that could be the person was selling drugs and they had inappropriate relationship with a student, to the less egregious unprofessional conduct, which would be, having unprofessional demeanor, being rude, being hostile, those sorts of things. If it's conduct-based, and it's something that rises to the level of requiring notice of charges. Insubordination is when a teacher refuses a direct order. There's a whole list of things that can be considered insubordination, one of which is a teacher refusing to admit whether they are or have ever been a member of the Communist Party. I can only imagine that statute was drafted in the 50s, but I wouldn't expect we'll be bringing notices of charges on that basis. But it also is any time that there has been a reasonable and non-discriminatory request made by a member of the administration or a principal, and that teacher has flat out refused to comply with that requirement. Those are the only bases for termination. There are various roles in the process, and what I want to go through is there is a flow chart that's a little bit more detailed that I'd like to pass out to you. Okay, you all have it. And I'm going to go through this quickly, but I think it's really helpful to give an overview of how the process comes to you. The blue points, the ones that are in blue, are decision points, and the rest is just sort of general process. It starts out with the principal wishes to dismiss a teacher. The principal consults with their supervisor, the executive lead principal, and submits a written recommendation for termination, describing why they want to terminate the teacher. That goes to Human Capital. Human Capital reviews the recommendation for termination and then forwards it to the Department of Law. That's me. And then I review the evidence and the recommendation for sufficiency. And what I'm really looking for is just, does it meet the requirements of the law? Does it fit into one of those categories of insubordination or inefficiency, or one of the listed categories? And if so, I look and prepare the notice of charges and supporting documents. So if it appears that there is sufficient evidence for termination, then the notice of charges is put in a legal format where it says this is on the basis of conduct unbecoming, or this is neglect of duty. It lists the basis and also the allegation or charges that would support termination, that could potentially support termination. Then that goes to the director of schools. He reviews the notice of charges and determines whether or not he wants to go forward with issuing the notice of charges to the board for review. If the director decides that it's appropriate, it's both legal, I've decided that it's legally sufficient, and then the director decides from a policy basis that he wants to pursue dismissal, then the director sends the teacher a notice of charges and a notice of the recommended termination, indicating to the teacher that he is going to be asking the board to certify the charges. At that time, the director may suspend a teacher without pay pending resolution of the charges. The statute actually authorizes the director to suspend the teacher without pay earlier in the process, at any time that an investigation begins. But in MNPS, we don't do that. We don't suspend a teacher without pay until there's actually been all this process has gone through and it's gotten to the point of issuance of a notice of charges. There are a lot of other school districts in the state that immediately suspend a teacher without pay as soon as they decide that they are going to be pursuing termination. And so, but we don't do that. That would probably end up with a lot of back pay owed, because a lot of those cases don't ever end up coming to you all for certification after investigation. The director may suspend the teacher at that point, and then also the director recommends to the board and asks the board to certify the charges that he's determined justify dismissal. The board then reviews the notice of charges under the statute to determine if the notice of charges warrant dismissal. And that is very weird, because as I said, there's 3 points in the process. There's the board certifying the charges, determining if they warrant dismissal, and then the full impartial hearing with all the evidence, and then the board deciding whether or not to uphold the finding of the hearing officer. Well, that first step, it says in the statute that the board determines whether the charges warrant dismissal. But with all of there's AG's opinions, and there's some case law, and from my review of the law on that issue, that really is not a pre-hearing. It's not a time to really weigh the evidence. It is, all that is just a certification of whether or not those charges, if proven true, justify and warrant dismissal. And so it's basically reading the face of the charges and saying, okay, even if I believe all of these things, which I don't because there hasn't been a hearing and we don't know if they're true yet, but if I believe all of these things, is that something that would warrant dismissal of a teacher? If you read it and it says, you know, these notice of charges, this teacher was 5 minutes late to work one time, obviously, or I mean, that's an extreme example, but if you read the notice of charges and even if everything was true, it would not warrant dismissal, then there's no reason to have a hearing, there's no reason to go through the rest of the process, and that's when the board just can vote not to certify the charges, and then the charges end and they don't go forward. So at that point, there is no hearing, there is no evidence, and the process ends there. Okay, does anyone have questions yet before I finish up? Okay, so then once the board determines that the charges are certified, then the teacher receives that notice under the statute that the board has certified the charges, and the teacher has 30 days to request a full and impartial hearing before a hearing officer. If the teacher requests the hearing, then the hearing officer is appointed to the case, and they're required to have a hearing within 30 days of the day that the teacher requested the hearing. So that has to happen in an expedited manner, where all the evidence has to be gathered and that hearing has to be held quickly. Then there's the hearing. And the hearing is where both sides present evidence. It's like a mini trial. There's one that will be coming before you all soon. It was a hearing last Monday, and it went for about 7 hours. There were only 3 witnesses, so it was a very long, long presentation of evidence. I'm glad you all didn't have to listen to it all night long, but you all will get a full record, which is a transcript of the entire hearing, as well as all the exhibits. So there will be a printed out record of the hearing. You'll be able to look at all the documentation, and if it comes down as a recommendation for dismissal, then if it's not a recommendation for dismissal, then the teacher is not dismissed. But if it is a recommendation for dismissal, then it comes back before you all if the teacher requests an appeal, and you all are able to look at all of the evidence and decide whether or not you believe that that evidence warrants dismissal of the teacher. Then the board reviews the record. This is very important. When you review the record, you all get to look at all the evidence, and then you can decide either to uphold the decision of the hearing officer, reverse the decision, modify the penalty, so you could recommend suspension instead of termination if you felt that was more appropriate, or remand it back to the hearing officer for more evidence. So, for example, if you were reading the record and you saw there's a teacher mentioned in here and we didn't hear from them, I'd really like to hear from this other teacher to see what they say about it, then you can remand it back to the hearing officer and ask them to hear from additional witnesses. So it comes back to you all, and even though you're not hearing from witnesses, you have all the evidence and you still have a lot to review, but you can kind of do it on your own time prior to the hearing, and then you all get to decide if you want to uphold the decision of the hearing officer. If the teacher is terminated, then the teacher can appeal it to Chancery Court. It then can go to the Court of Appeals in the Tennessee Supreme Court if they want to appeal it further. So I want to answer any questions you all have about the process. It is an unusual process.
Any questions? Really?
They just want to get out of here. Oh, one thing I forgot to say that's really important to link it up to the previous discussion of teacher evaluations. One of the definitions of inefficiency is that a teacher has received evaluations of below expectations or significantly below expectations, and the way I interpret that is that it has to be more than one evaluation that has an S on it, so at least 2 years of a 2 or a 1, and that's the team composite. That's the language that signifies the state team composite. And so one of the bases, the possible statutory bases for termination is a teacher who is performing the lowest levels on the team evaluation 2 years in a row. And so it is an important policy issue for you all as a system and as a board to decide if you want to take advantage or use that statutory provision, which allows termination based on 2 years of team composites in the 1 or 2 level. So I think that's something that's really important, since this termination process requires kind of everyone working in conjunction with their own roles. I think it is an important conversation to have whether or not you all welcome charges on the basis of team evaluation scores.
Okay, Dr. Gentry, then Mr. Hayes, and then Ms. Shepherd. I knew that'd get them.
No offense, but yeah. Okay, so here's I think the challenge. I don't think there's anybody at this table that enjoys being a part of this process. However, and I asked Ms. Hawkins to give me a copy of the letter that's read to us as a part of this process. And so I'm going to do my comparison thing again, and I apologize. If I had an employee that I'd been working with and have to then go to my boss and say, this person's just not cutting it, I've asked for A, B, C, and D, it's just not happening, I just don't think this is where their strengths lie, we need to consider transitioning them to another area, or relieving them of some of their responsibilities, or if there's no other place to put them, dismissing them altogether. My boss would never go and talk to my employee about that. And there wouldn't be a line of people going to my boss to explain to my boss that my recommendation for dismissing them is unfair. And so I think what we have in our process is, so we've just been presented with a yeoman's effort to create an objective observation and evaluation process that gets totally undermined by a subjective component of how we operate. Right, so if we go back to the last incident that kind of sparked this request for this presentation, we got a line of subjective commentary that blew us all away. And again, totally undermined this objective process that we have been trying to build up and firm up and support, and you come to us and we're like, yeah, that's great, but then we do something or have something just inherently a part of how we do business that totally turns that upside down. And so I'm just trying to figure out, and again, we have these discussions all the time about, when we go on our retreats, about what is our role under policy governance, and how we find ourselves often being pulled into discussions and throwing our supposed expertise into the operations of the district. And I don't know that the process that we have outlined here allows us to do our role. And what I believe, and I think several of us believe, is appropriate given the structure under which we're supposed to operate as a board.
Can you explain that? I mean, how that could, yes, like which parts of it are problematic?
So, and again, I'm going back to the comparison. I don't know if it's, I think this would be better, I think it makes sense that as Dr. Register being our one employee, not any teacher in the district, for us to weigh in on whether or not they should be fired. I think our question is, do we support Dr. Register's evaluation of that teacher's dismissal? And so I don't know how we change the mechanics of the process to keep us focused on where our focus needs to be. Because we had the opportunity last time to look beyond Dr. Register and his professional assessment of what needed to be done to meet the goals of the district. that we have agreed to, but the process allow for that to happen. So I don't know if it's tweaking here. I don't know if it's tweaking in the in the statute, but somehow we've got to create a process that keeps us focused on, do we support our one employee's professional assessment on what needs to be done so that we can continue to meet the goals, having an excellent teacher in the classroom and achieving the academic goals that we are here to achieve. Because that's all our purpose is. It's not to evaluate teachers. I don't think our purpose should be to weigh evidence about teaching. There are very few of us on this board that can say, I know what a good teacher looks like.
And I absolutely, I think that is the inherent conflict within the statute. And it may be that, I mean, that's kind of above my pay grade, is looking at statutory changes, but that may be something that you all want to, as a board, consider, because it is inherent in the statute.
Do we own the process? So, I mean, the statute is what it is. I don't know if that's a fight that we're going to get accomplished before either of us ages off the board.
I think the problem is that the statute requires you all to be the ultimate weighers of the evidence.
It's the implementation of the process. So why is this not an executive session? Why is this not?
Certification of charges.
Huh?
Certification.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe one of the things that was a problem with, I think it is a problem when you hear, and the case law supports that it's problematic for the board to be hearing beyond just the notice of charges, to be hearing actual evidence about the teacher prior to the impartial, not informal, the impartial hearing officer hearing the case and then you all weighing the evidence. So what we had at the last meeting was people coming in and giving evidence on one side. And so it may be something that you all want to consider. Do you want to hear public comment on the issue that you're going to be later asked to rule on?
So here we go. If we follow the flow and we get to blue box number 3, our only job is to support Dr. Register. That's it. It's clear here. It's not that how it ever gets past, I know we get into evidence if it gets past that, but I'm just talking about our function as a board. And please, I understand this. We don't have to argue this. You don't have to explain this.
The statute, though, unfortunately, gives you all the authority to overrule Dr. Register if you believe that the charges as brought are not sufficient to warrant dismissal. And so that's the first decision you all have to make, is when you read the charges, is that something that you all would ultimately, if you find them to be true, would you uphold them?
Teacher neutral, like you don't need to know about that.
Yeah, you don't even need to know anything about that teacher. And in fact, the less you know, the better prior to the impartial hearing. But the problem is, Dr. Register.
Go ahead.
Okay. The problem is that there was a lot of evidence actually testified
so I don't want
to.
to focus just on that case. I mean, that's an example, but the opportunity. So again, I just want us to elevate the conversation.
Yes.
The opportunity for us to override exists in the process. So again, when we get into executive sessions and we hear cases about students, names are redacted. We don't know who that student is, but we do it based on what that student is alleged to have done. Do we believe that student should go to an alternative school? Why is that legal process so inherently different from this one?
So in response, I might say there are a couple of questions that we could legitimately raise. One is, could the board deny public comment? You've got to certify the charges. You've got to certify that the charges, if proven true, warrant dismissal.
Do I have to know who the teacher is?
Do you have to know who the teacher is?
If it's about the charges, if it's about those 5 categories, do I need to know that it's Sharon Gentry teaching at McGavick who sucks?
Right. Well, I think that's one question, but then the second one is the point that Kathy's making is, can you deny hearing evidence on one side of an issue? And then maybe a third procedural is you could put it on the consent agenda.
And I think if the names
so
are redacted, the other two of them.
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
Then, unfortunately, the names can't be redacted because that's required for notice to the teacher and the due
nothing to
process.
us, just to the teacher.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, they need to know they're getting dismissed. I mean, that makes sense, but I don't need to
Okay,
know
at the
that.
certification as charges stage to not have the
Because if
name.
you're telling me that I'm certifying based on 5 categories of impartial evidence.
I think that's a good idea.
Does it matter who the teacher is? And I'm asking, because I'm trying to
That
get
could be
us back
legally
into what
done.
I believe our role is as
Might could be legally challenged, too.
We started hearing evidence.
Might could be
I mean, the
legally
process
challenged, too.
inherently, I think, puts us not in an impartial position.
So the question I would have is, could that be legally challenged? Would that take away part of a person's due process rights?
That's a question.
By law?
I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, I could research that, but I'm thinking that as long as that person has noticed that the charges are being brought before them, they clearly do not have a right to have a pre-hearing before the board prior to the evidence going to the the impartial hearing officer. So I don't think it would deny them due process as long as they have notice, and then as long as there is a fair hearing with all of the evidence, and then the board hears everything. I mean, of course, you would know the teacher when you heard all the evidence at the end. But in the certificate, I'll research whether the certification of charges portion requires a name, because really it should be neutral. It should be, as you said, I mean, it should be that you're looking at just the list
Same
of
thing that we do
charges.
for our students.
And I also think that legally you could say, we're not going to hear, because of our role in having to weigh this evidence after there's been a full presentation of the evidence, we're not going to hear from people on either side. Because what the public commentary invites is the principal and everyone on the other side and the parents who have complained about a teacher to all come in and try to be heard before there's even been a hearing on the issue. And I think that could get really out of hand if you're being asked to hear the evidence.
According to this, that violated this process.
Right.
Yes. And it is clear from the law that it's preferred for the board to have as little information as possible prior to being asked to make that decision at the end, which is supposed to be based on a full and fair hearing. I mean, the idea is that you all look at everything that there is on both sides of an issue, and then you have the free rein to decide, no, we don't think this teacher should be terminated, we think this teacher should just be suspended or not suspended at all, or we agree with the termination.
I think those are valid points. I think, and again, if the first one, if we can redact that information at the board level, then it makes the other two moot.
Yeah, I think so.
Mr. Hayes and then Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you. One quick question just around, and I have a second question, but I haven't quite articulated it in my mind yet. So I'll start with the first one that I was thinking about, which was the 1 and 2, the ability to terminate because of inefficiency. What's the timeline around that? My recollection is that we don't get those scores back until October.
No, we get them back in July.
In July.
No?
It depends on, so some of those 15% measures that you saw that we were talking about earlier, some of those are lagging. A lot of teachers used the graduation rate. Those data don't come in until early fall. So some of the team composites will have starting now, starting in the next few weeks. The rest will come in slowly over the course of the next 3 months.
The state has said the ability to begin finalizing the evaluations in the databases the second week of August.
So for all of our staff?
No, for those that have all of the components.
No, so my question is for all of our staff, when would we be able to make that kind of decision?
Right.
So is it
December, yeah, towards the end.
So it would take about 3 years. So that teacher theoretically, right, so they're evaluated, they get a 1.
Yeah.
They teach again, right? They have another year, they get a 1.
Correct.
So theoretically, 3 years.
Yeah.
Plus?
So, no, an issue with the way this process is rolling out and has rolled out is the timeline that we do both receive the evaluation results back from the state, which in many cases, like we said, is not until early fall, as well as when we want to be able to make thoughtful dismissal decisions prior to the beginning of a school year. It's not in the best interest of kids to have a dismissal in the middle of a year. We'd like to do that as soon as possible if we don't think that the quality of teaching is there. We are not going, if we do choose to pursue the dismissal of teachers who receive a 1 or a 2 on their team composite, we would not wait to receive all of the team composites for the entire district back. We would be looking, as soon as we get team composites of a 1 for a second year in a row, we're going to start going through those on a case-by-case basis. And if we believe that they warrant dismissal, we will go through this process and bring them before you all for dismissal for inefficiency. We are going to do that in a very thoughtful, very careful way. We're going to be looking at the implementation of the evaluation. Was it done with fidelity? What were all the steps along the way that teacher has experienced in the district in terms of support? So we will be taking it very, very seriously. No one up here, no one in the school district takes the dismissal of a teacher lightly at all. And so it'll be a very thorough process, and it will begin in the next few weeks when we get those team composites back. The evaluation, the determination of whether or not to bring them for dismissal.
I'm going to pass on other questions.
Ms. Shepherd?
Just a procedural question. Does Dr. Register and you, Kathy, do you both look at the entire employee file prior to making your decisions as to whether or not to bring a notice of charges?
Yes, and one of the things that Human Capital does is they put together not only the entire the central office file, but also the school-based, everything that exists on the teacher from the school-based files, which often they're sometimes in different places. Like principals keep their own files, but then there may be some from other older school years, and so they pull together everything that exists on a teacher, and then we look at that as a whole.
When I look at it, there are no automatics. Each case is considered on its own, and almost without, I'm not sure there's any exception to my having a conference with Metro Legal and also Human Capital. The teacher dismissals are not taken lightly, and there aren't any automatics. Just because you have a 1 doesn't mean you're going to be dismissed. The law says that we can do that now, but what are the other factors? Has the evaluation process for each individual case had integrity? What are the other circumstances that can be applied to that decision? And that's the way we do it.
Thank you.
Ms. Froh?
Okay, I'll try to make it really quick because I know
I'm spending the night at this point.
Okay, I think the real problem that we're having, which I've already mentioned to Kathy, is that there is an inherent conflict between the statute that governs these procedures and our policy governance model. So we are really supposed to be hands-off in the operations of the district, but yet the statute has sort of forced us into this strange position of I mean, this is a very district level of making a decision, a very district level decision. And I haven't really read through the statute, but a lot of this flowchart seems to be practiced and not statutory. Some of it is, and I know there are due process considerations. But if this is a, you can tell me, but if this is simply a practice that we have, I'm wondering why we even have to certify the charges. Is that statutory?
That's statutory.
See, that's the
I know.
To me, it's a
makes no
pointless step.
sense. Yeah.
Because when are you ever going to bring a totally baseless charge?
Right.
But you have
So we're
to.
always going to say yes.
Yeah.
I mean, unless we just absolutely, have a situation where, where, I mean, I think, in the case that we had, that raised a lot of questions, and I think factually, we had the basis to make the decision we did. But that is about as far as I can see us going. So, and maybe a question of trying to amend the statute. And I know the other problem is that we are not, we are an unusual board that we follow this policy governance model because these little rural districts don't do that, and so they get more involved in the operation. So, anyway, that's it.
Yeah. And it's mainly because they have like less than 5,000 children in 3 schools.
Yeah.
Okay, Hope, Ms. Spearing, but I've got we already redact addresses. And Kathy, once we hear back from you on whether the names can be redacted, I want to start that ASAP.
Okay.
Because I don't think there's a need to continue if it's not going to create an issue, and if it's not, if the statute doesn't say that we have to have those names, I don't see there's a reason for that. That prevents a lot of go forward with, and I did watch that board meeting, by the way, and it was pretty interesting, and you all did a very good job. Sorry I missed that, but it wasn't even convincing, was it? Okay. But yes, if we have a legal ruling that says we can redact that information, we need to start doing that as soon as possible.
One of the things, because we are required to tell the teacher who's being considered for termination that it's going to be on the that it's going to be presented for certification of charges at the next board meeting, and the date is given to the teacher. What about the issue where the teacher contacts people and asks them to come out and testify? Do you all want to continue to?
If it is going to be based on, and based on your comments earlier, if the commentary is going to be based on that case, then we won't allow it.
Okay.
Does that need a vote?
No. Yeah, I just voted. Yeah. No, it doesn't need a vote. It's just a basic adjustment of the agenda. So.
Okay. I have a comment and a question about the team model. How attached are we to the team model? I know that it's not used across the state. There's even a model that teachers seem to like better from Hamilton County, or that Hamilton County uses. Maybe it's called the coach model. It's one that teachers seem to, there's been more buy-in from teachers, and I think it's important to have buy-in from teachers if they're going to be evaluated and paid according to the results. And is that, whose decision is that? Is that Dr. Register's decision?
Well, at this point in time, it would be my decision to allow some variation, I think. We've had a couple of principals that have been interested in the Hamilton County model. To this point in time, we've talked about a pilot, maybe looking at that, but we also need to see what results they have. And so what are their correlations with observation compared to test scores? And I think we're so heavily invested in the one that we have now, we can consider change, but I don't think we're at a place where we ought to really jump at this point in time. We're still developing this model. We're still learning how to do it. We're improving our practice, and we've invested 3 years in the process and probably millions of dollars in the process in terms of time and money. So I think moving fairly slowly on it, but also looking around and seeing what else is involved is a prudent way to go.
Any additional questions? Oh, you guys just didn't want to stay till
Just one other point about that.
Well, he does.
The due process part of their process is the same as ours. That's controlled by statute. That's controlled by law. You still have to follow the same steps.
Any final questions or comments? Thank you. Having none, I will make one reminder, for anybody who may still be watching. Tomorrow here at 5 o'clock, we will have the public discussion on the 2014-15 calendar option. So that will be in this boardroom at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. So, Ms. Rose.
This meeting is adjourned.